Okay, we're live. Good morning to everybody, and welcome to Friends Old and New to the July 11th, 2026 edition of the Saturday Free School. We have a pretty packed agenda of things to talk about today, so try to keep it short. But today we're going to be first addressing the continuing war in Iran and the recent developments that have happened, especially over the past week. And then we're going to assess and debrief our July 4th event that we held at Mother Bethel AME and what it says about the rest of the year, the nation's 250th, and our sense of political vision going into the rest of the year. And then we wanted to dedicate, as part of that, or connected to it, part of the conversation to the new issue of our journal Avant-Garde that we launched last weekend at July 4th. And to talk a little bit about why we wanted to publish this issue in the way that we did, the kind of core ideas that we're trying to present, and also share some of the process that went into it as well. But yeah, that sounds good. I can start things off with the Iran discussion. And I think most people know that essentially the war has restarted. Trump earlier this week said that the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States is dead. And actually this morning, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, he posted on his social media platform that he has 1,000 missiles locked and loaded and aimed at Iran. And that if they try to assassinate him, that the US military is willing to, for a span of 1 year period, to completely decimate and destroy all areas of Iran. And that he did that thing that he does sometimes where he says, "Praise be to Allah," as an insult to Islam, world Islam, darker humanity. And I think it's not just the theatrics of Trump, but the other big thing that has happened along with the war essentially restarting was the funeral for the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And actually it's an interesting juxtaposition between the funeral of the Ayatollah and the July 4th celebration in the United States. Both were happening at the same time. I don't know if people saw, there was footage of what Trump had planned is like this grand American state fair in the National Mall, and nobody showed up. And I guess we'll talk more about the funeral itself, but it was also, I think it was Trump's birthday too. And nobody showed up for what should be the most momentous occasion in the life of the United States. And just to talk specifically about the funeral, I know that others have been watching, like I spent a while yesterday just watching footage of the funeral. But even at the international level, the funeral and memorial for the Ayatollah Khamenei was attended by, I think, delegations from more than 100 countries. Wow. And that's important because the United States has explicitly warned basically the world not to participate in the commemoration of the Ayatollah's martyrdom. And so you had delegations obviously from China, from Russia, from India and Pakistan, as well as countries like Malaysia, Cuba, basically like the entirety, Indonesia, the entirety of the darker world. And the more remarkable, I think, fact we were just talking about before the live stream started was that Iran has estimated that 41 to 43 million people participated in this funeral procession over the span of 1 week, which stretched across. So the casket carrying his body went to 5 different cities over a span of 6 days. And I think it's important to note that, like, you know, we'll get into it with the July 4th event that we did here locally, which is obviously much smaller scale, but we were very worried about the temperature last Saturday. And Iran, like cities like Tehran, were even hotter than that. I think that's part of what makes it so remarkable, is even hotter temperatures than what we were experiencing last week. Millions of people showing up, like in a city like Tehran, like more than the entire population of Philadelphia shows up for this funeral. And the 5 cities that the procession went to, and I guess Samir or others can fill in with more knowledge about like their historical relevance in Islam, but it started in Tehran, and then it went to the holy city of Quds, and then it went to actually 2 cities in Iraq, Najaf and then Karbala, which is a very important city for Shia Islam, because that is where as I understand, the Battle of Karbala happened in the 7th century, I think, and that's where Imam Hussein, who is kind of the most, to me, it seems like he is the most important figure to the Islamic Republic of Iran right now. And actually, the son of the Ayatollah, who is now the current leader, published a statement today, essentially saying that the slain Ayatollah Khamenei is essentially in the legacy and essentially comparing him to Imam Hussein. And the last city where they buried the Ayatollah was in Mashhad in Iran. I think part of what's also remarkable about it, from what I was seeing, is the fact that the funeral that Ayatollah that they brought it to Iraq is significant because of the Iran-Iraq war that happened in the 1970s and 80s. And so I think that's part of the testament to the legacy and the achievements of like this generation of leadership in Iran, that after what was like honestly in some ways a more devastating war back then compared to now, that over the span of like a generation, they've been able to win over so many parts of not just Iraq, but large parts of the world. And I think it's fair to argue that Ayatollah Khamenei has become greater in his significance in his death than maybe he was in his life. But yeah, this was, again, by all accounts, the largest funeral in human history. I don't think that there's actually anything that's come close to this. And in many ways, I guess you could see it as almost a kind of pilgrimage for the body of the Ayatollah. And the other remarkable aspect of it is everywhere, if you look at photos of these funeral processions, everyone raised this red flag, which, as I understand it, in Shia Islam, is basically the red flag of Imam Hussein, which is the flag of vengeance. And that's something where if you look at videos and interviews of ordinary people who participated in these funeral processions, that was the overwhelming response from Iranians, from I guess now Iraqis, from people who paid their respects, was not just mourning, but that this is something that has to be avenged. And I guess the exact nature of what that will look like remains to be determined. But yeah, I guess in the midst of all that, I think towards the very end of this long multi-day funeral procession, the United States began bombing. I think it was like 170 places in Iran over a span of 2 days. They were bombing not just military sites, but also civilian bridges. I think there were like bridges close to some of these major funeral sites as well that they were bombing, basically in response to the funeral itself. And you can see that as a way of not just Trump, but I think the US state, and I guess by extension Israel, not being willing to accept this defeat. And I think that's really what explains why even the war is restarting, is that just not to get too much into details, but the memorandum of understanding that Iran and the US signed a month ago essentially dictated that Iran, for a span of 60 days, would essentially coordinate all maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And a lot of commentators have pointed out, like Trita Parsi and other people, that what the US has tried to do over the span of the past 2 weeks especially has been to try to bypass that specific part of the memorandum. And the reason why that matters is because the entire reason why Iran has won the war is in large part because of their control of the Strait of Hormuz. And so the U.S. has been essentially sending like oil tankers and stuff through the strait, but through the part of territory, the water territory that's under Oman, and then also ships that are not, they're basically trying to camouflage. And they're trying to not signal to Iran and like the IRGC that those ships are passing through. And so, again, I think that like, for me, what explains a lot of this is that whether it's Trump or the American regime or the Israelis, they are almost constitutionally unable to accept defeat, this kind of defeat. And that's why even if they know they can't win the war, they want to try to, I guess, drag it out, it seems like, because it could be that we're stuck in a kind of gray area phase for a long time of escalation and de-escalation and escalation again, and essentially like no actual pathway to peace. But that is, in effect, that's the best that the United States can do, because they have been defeated by a country that they saw as basically barbaric and uncivilized, ironically. And I guess for me, just to comment more on Ayatollah Khamenei, I think I do believe that a figure like him does become greater in death. And actually, it made me think about Martin Luther King in some ways, in that sense. I think the two things I wanted to bring up are that I was talking with Doc about it because there's this interesting interview on Dropsite News with this scholar who has studied Iran, but he said one of the achievements of this past generation of leadership under Ayatollah Khamenei has been the achievement of what they call a mosaic state. Yeah. In which, as far as I understand it, power, first of all, is distributed. Because I think this is one of the big conceptions, I guess, about Iran, which is that because you have a supreme leader, that it's like, it's a totally consolidated and centralized government, but actually, like whether it's like the government and the IRGC or these other institutions, part of how Iran has been able to sustain itself after you essentially decapitate the top level of leadership, which they did in the first day of the war, especially with the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, is that power is distributed, and that also they're able to ideologically develop the pipeline, I guess, or what you could call the pipeline of leadership, so that if you remove one piece, it doesn't destroy the entire structure that you're able to replace, and then it keeps reproducing itself. I don't know if others want to comment on that. And then the other thing that I was watching this video with Max Blumenthal, who's interviewing that guy, Professor Mohammad Marandi, in the funeral procession in Tehran. And something that Marandi brought up that I really liked was he ultimately, the way that he explained Iran's victory against the United States and Israel was, in his words, he says it was because of the ideology of the Islamic Republic and the ideology of the people. And in particular, he talked about what Shia Islam means for Iran, and how for someone like him, Shia Islam and like being like a citizen of Iran, it's almost like they're inseparable. And that a lot of what he interprets as being the legacy of the recently martyred Ayatollah is as part of this ideology of Shia Islam, a moral position of always defending the oppressed. And one could say that it wasn't just that the United States and Israel killed the Ayatollah because he was Iranian, but because Iran stood by Gaza and by Palestine. And if you look at the speeches of Ayatollah Khamenei in the years leading up to this, like that is one of the most consistent themes, is like we will never forsake basically Palestine. I think Marandi was saying that ideology, that ideological core is what explains not just the response of the state and the military, but also the popular mobilizations that have occurred in Iran over the span of the past several months, in which you have, again, these like really remarkable gatherings, these mass mobilizations, these mass protests and demonstrations where I think we've talked about it, like literally while American bombs are falling on them, they flood the streets and they stand there. And, when the other example was when Trump earlier threatened to essentially annihilate Iranian civilization a few months ago, you have that remarkable display of young people, old people gathering around the energy facilities and the bridges and other kinds of civilian infrastructure that the United States would have bombed. And what we interpreted as a display of revolutionary nonviolence. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to share from Iran. And then I think the other thing is that, as people know, even while all of this is happening, the Israeli onslaught in Gaza has continued. I think many people who've been watching the World Cup saw that I think he was Egyptian, the man who had organized these watch parties in Gaza to watch the World Cup, was assassinated by Israel, among the many other targeted assassinations and just wanton killing that Israel has been trying to kind of maintain almost like a low-level intensity onslaught and genocide while I guess people are distracted. But I just wanted to just bring that up as the last point. I don't know if others have things they wanted to share. But,
yeah. Can I say something? Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. I think there's certain facts that we have to start with. One, the United States has been defeated. And the consequences of this domestically and internationally are still being calculated. We just don't know the full magnitude or consequence of this defeat. I lived through the defeat in Vietnam. This is 10 times more devastating to the American empire than the defeat in Vietnam, or even the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was, quote, their victory, if you will. But they have lost. The rule, and I take Trump's behavior, which always is crazy, but I think what he's talking about now, I got 1,000 missiles if you kill me. Well, you reap what you sow. And part of these, millions of Iranians that turned out is that there was a definite break with the government over negotiations. The people are saying this memorandum of understanding, which I would say is a document of surrender. For Trump to have signed that in Paris was a surrender that we have lost, we can't win, and that if we continue this, the whole world economy can be thrown into a depression. Big thing. This is not small. And the Iranians fought probably one of the most intelligent wars of recent times. It was not so much asymmetric as a military peer who outmaneuvered, outthought, and outdid everything to the United States. And the Iranians have profound disadvantages. They don't have an adequate, as far as I can see, missile defense system right now. You know what I'm saying? They got something which can explain the pattern of the U.S. attacks and their missile attacks and everything. The United States is not just going up in there, and they're not sending their best stuff like F-35s. At least one of them was shot down or so damaged that it had to land. This is some weeks ago, land in Iraq, a U.S. base. I just want to say, with all of the threats, and Trump is a war criminal. The regime of the United States is a criminal regime. they not only, I'm sorry, I'll just stop. They not only killed the Ayatollah, but they killed his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, and then they bombed that children's school and killed 170 people. You know what I'm saying? And then, of course, Trump and the regime in this country face the fact that 60% of the American people are against the war. I mean, you're talking about on the precipice of regime change, and let's keep it 100. I'll just go back to John F. Kennedy's assassination. His assassination had more to do with foreign policy in terms of Cuba and in terms of nuclear disarmament. Most of the deep state wanted to bomb Cuba into oblivion. Kennedy didn't go along with it. In a certain way, there are parallels to where Trump finds himself right now. And so he's acting crazy because it's driving him crazy. He doesn't have to worry about the Iranians killing him.
Yeah.
The knives are out in the ruling class in this country. And the reason I say this is because if we properly read people like Robert Kagan, major figure in the state, when he announces, this has been a defeat, yada, 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 when others say the same thing, it indicates a real split within the state, within the military. I think for us, well, one thing, I guess we're going to go over to the July 4th event. The question of peace and against American imperialism, and this government in particular, the American people have to, in other words, we cannot lose confidence. I'll just end on this. I was on a panel on WURD radio. I don't know if you listen to that. You ain't missing up. But I was on a panel, and on it was on July 3rd. So the big thing was July 4th, and what does July 4th mean to the Black community? And the easy step is everybody goes back to Frederick Douglass. What to the slave is your 4th of July. Beautiful. But it is, and it says something, but what we need now has to address the world situation. And, yes, Declaration of Independence signed by men who were slave owners. You know what I'm saying? How do you deal with that? You know what I'm saying? That's a big question. How do we Black folk deal with it going forward? You know what I'm saying? And I think we deal with it in the ways that Frederick Douglass and Du Bois and King and so many others, now that Jefferson has said it, we Black folk, be we abolitionists, be we civil rights fighters, whoever, we will give essence and substance to all men are created equal. And that's why it's so overlapping the Black gods of the metropolis, the Father Divines of the world. You said it, now we're gonna make it real. And so this is very important. But I'll just say this. So much of the panel was just pouring out the grievances and aggrieved and injured people, but no sense of where do we go from here? What is to be done? Are we going to lick our wounds and and say to the nation over and over and over again, we have been injured, we have been wounded.
Mm.
But we're more than that. We are more than our wounds. We are more than our injuries. We are more than our grievances. And the history of our struggle, of our art, of our music, proves it. But I say that to say that my panel members wanted to talk about Frederick Douglass, but did not want to talk about war and peace. Did not want to talk about what is before us. And I think, and I was talking to another friend of mine who doesn't do anything but sit around, maybe smokes his weed, and, read certain things, but nothing proactive. And such people who do not know the people, do not engage with the people, always conclude certain negative things about the people. I said, brother, let's be 100. See, I went through Vietnam. So I have a sense of an anti-war movement and mobilization that forced a president, or in part was responsible for forcing a president, Johnson that is, not to run for a second term, and made it impossible for the United States to carry out a war in Vietnam because young men were refusing to go into the army and fight in that war. What we're looking at now is way beyond that. Way beyond that. And the nation, I would say, and it's not, we haven't gotten polling data. Just like more Americans support the Palestinians than support the Israelis, I would bet a lot of money that the American people watching the funeral, watching the grieving, watching the dignity. There was no rioting or stampeding and all of that type of thing. The huge self-discipline of the people and hearing Trump abuse Islam, abuse a great civilization nation has awakened the American people. And I would estimate, probably more Americans support Iran and the Iranian civilization than support the Palestinians. And we'll have to wait. I think so. Yeah, could you see? Well, they're against the war, 60%. Well, it's not a big leap to say these are people who, you know what I'm saying. So a vast, let me put it this way. The field of struggle is being reconfigured. Like any battlefield, you can start, it's one way, but then in the course of the battle, one or the other side can reshape the battlefield. The battlefield has been profoundly and irreversibly reshaped. The possibilities of deep change in this country are greater than ever before. And the issue of peace and the consequences of deindustrialization and all of that, the impoverishment, all of this coming together, not in perfect form. Everybody doesn't see it like we see it, but more people in this country are seeing things more clearly than ever before. And thus the battlefield is reconfigured. And I think, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Could I just have one thing? Which is,
just one. Can I just say one? The Saudis were there.
Yeah.
Which is huge because Saudi Arabia is the center of the shrines of Sunni Islam. And I think it was the foreign minister to have come. was very important.
Well, I just wanted to say, actually, as you were talking, it helped me to think more clearly about not that we're not trying to attribute too much rationality to Trump, but actually
right.
part of what I think does explain why he's going in this direction is it's like he's between a rock and a hard place. Like, if you were to really escalate the war to the level it was before, or even a bigger regional world war, that would be, I mean, he's already said it, that he doesn't want to be Herbert Hoover. He doesn't want to be a president who essentially precipitates a global depression and basically destroys the American, if not the world economy. So that's one abyss that's facing him. The other side is he can't accept defeat either, because the consequences of actually admitting defeat are also equally profound, where there are consequences both internationally as well as domestically.
Yes.
Where I think the funeral and all of those world leaders, those delegations, defined the United States and saying we are going to attend, we're going to pay respects to the leader of Iran, shows already how, like you're saying, the battlefield of even like the world politics of the struggle of world humanity, that is supposed to be reshaped.
We've never seen anything like this.
Because I think if we look at even like what is it that upholds this thing that we call the American empire, it is both, in some ways you could, maybe this is a simplification, but it is in some ways the consent of countries that participate in the system that has been set up by the United States, as well as the consent of the people within the United States, the citizens of this country, who consent to a certain type of state, a certain type of state that does not actually have any interest in governing democratically and is only really interested in war. And for the United States to admit defeat in a war like Iran, because part of it, I think that does help to explain like why they did this in the first place, is because Trump thought they could do, many people have said this, Trump thought he could do a Venezuela to Iran. And they thought that they could decapitate the leadership in Iran, and that essentially they could take over and control who came next. And they thought there would be no consequences for it. And actually, I think what Iran has shown is not just the material, strategic, whatever geopolitical place that Iran has because of the Strait of Hormuz, but also the moral leadership that Iran has risen to through the span of the war has made them much more beloved and attractive to the world's people, to darker humanity especially. And I think to Americans, like to your point, I think like the other piece that I've been looking at recently is Cuba. And it seems like the Trump administration and like Marco Rubio and them basically want to try to, I think already Cuba has declared like energy blackouts, but they want to try to starve Cuba into regime change. But I think for the American people, this question becomes more glaring and more concrete of how can you submit to a state that acts in this way, that wages these kinds of wars without any regard for not just quote unquote national interests, but basic human morality. And this is the point that we were trying to make with the July 4th event and the declaration and all of that. But I agree with you that was why I asked the question at the end of the July 4th program of what does the war in Iran say about essentially the end of what we call the American empire in the 250th year of the quote unquote founding of the nation.
Could I just, this is a word that I'm always pronouncing it wrong, but a Zugzwang. It's a German word in chess, which means no matter what move you make, you lose. That's where they are. And, I can't say how happy I am for you all to be living through this, to see this hated empire and this hated leader. Is he aware of how much he's hated throughout the world? Because it's more than the Iranians that would like to kill him. I mean, his own. But anyway, no matter what move he makes, he loses. There is no way out of this.
It's hard to say anything without connecting it to the event that we did last weekend,
Yes.
where, well, I wanted to completely agree that because sometimes, there's the two sides of what you hope to be true,
Mhm.
and you're constantly testing it against the evidence of, is it really true? And, whether you want to define it as faith, or kind of like a dogged determination to pursue the truth, no matter whether it's validated or not. And then the other side of actually you need to test it against the truth of the people and signs and look for signs. But last weekend, I wanted to use last weekend, and I've been reflecting a lot about our event that we did at Mother Bethel AME Church for July 4th, which you could, for us, it's funny because we say it in Free School weeks ago, but then the polls last week, all the local channels like WHYY and all these different newspapers were like, polls show that Americans find little to celebrate this July 4th. And it's like, wow, you just figured that out. Like, oh, you needed polls really to figure that out.
Yeah.
It's been like this for, if anything, decades, and we're seeing it come to a head. But the way Doc and Jeremiah raised to the forefront, especially when people look at that funeral procession in Iran, that I think even the American people in this country, especially I would say the young generation, sees Iran and says, that is more similar to what I want to become. That is something I can respect or worship more than whatever leadership we have in this country, the moral hypocrisy. But the thing that last weekend showed me was I wasn't sure if people would come, because actually genuinely I was a little like, would people want to come out in the heat for an event on, July 4th? People also, maybe they wouldn't want to come out at all because July 4th is not even a day they want to commemorate or celebrate. But I felt like last week showed, I think we found evidence that there is a deep hunger for a serious conversation about a final reckoning. A final civilizational reckoning, like an assertion of moral truth. Like, I feel like there is a strong sense that there is no quote unquote American identity. What is there to celebrate in ourselves? Like, who are we as a people? What is there have we even asserted anything to celebrate or feel? And I thought I felt like there was a hunger more than like people would expect to actually have a conversation about where do we go from here. I also think that there also seemed to be a hunger for people, like when I say more for moral truth, I think people want to not just talk about the shallow things, the shallow surface of, oh, we have problems, but let's get to the deep plumbing to explain why is it that generation after generation, we have not been able to confront the deep plumbing that manifests as the material and objective violent forces of war, violence, incarceration, like all the forces that basically children feel the most, that our children have to face the most. And I think the thing I wanted to agree with you, Doc, and you, Jeremiah, is that more and more we're getting the sense that actually the demand of the people that's being put on the table is actually the demand for peace, which concretely is like, when are we going to end this imperialist empire, end imperialism? And I think that is really the big flaming truth that more and more people seem to be contending with. And not just imperialism as an abstract idea, but our own government that purveys, that is the greatest purveyor of war and imperialism. But the way I kind of saw it was, I felt like us reading our own People's Declaration, an alternative to the Declaration of 1776, but saying, we're not going to just let this marker of the 250th year of the US go and pass. Someone must speak out. We will speak out. We will attempt to say, this is what we think. This is the time on the clock. And we believe that the people, just like King said, there is no such thing as waiting, but that actually the people can use time and decide. There's no such thing as waiting for the right time, but deciding that the time is right to act, to end what is wrong and assert what is right. And I do feel like there's a hunger for that. I felt like the audience, really resonated with that reading of the Declaration that we wrote and how it was written, defining the crisis, but also asserting that there is a revolutionary soil that exists in this country, and it comes from the political struggle, the moral struggle of Black folk. That there is hope. We are both in a crisis, but there's also a sort of resistance. And I also felt like people resonated with, this was another thing I wasn't sure of, where Doc and I were going back and forth on, is showing 20 minutes of King reading a letter from a Birmingham jail. Will that bore people? Like, sometimes you just never know what the energy will be making those choices. And I actually thought that people resonated with the way Doc in your presentation interpreted time, that there is no such thing as, in a crisis like today, there's a sense in the spirit of people that there is no longer such thing as waiting. There's one choice, and the choice is to unite and act. And for what? But I also thought the other thing that came up a lot, which is why I was emphasizing moral truth so much, is there's this line I never paid attention to, actually, in Letter from a Birmingham Jail. The King, he says, in his critique of the Black church and the church as an institution in the country, where he says, the thing is that in every church, there's a church within the church. And that church within the church is the essence of moral truth.
He calls it the spiritual church.
The spiritual church.
The church that is not the bricks and mortar.
Yeah, the spiritual church. And for some reason, I felt the energy in the room really resonated with that line. Of, in a time of crisis, even if the church has lost its way, can you find the spiritual church within the church? That it is time for a moral truth to be asserted. Like, that is the deep plumbing of what could be, as much as the immorality of Western civilization is at the deep plumbing of what is wrong. And the reason why I also think that now is the time, like, I think the stage of history we are at is for the people to pick up the demand for peace and pick up the demand to abolish empire, and a revolutionary transformation of even the systems around us. Is some of us went to Mother Bethel AME's service on July 5th. And I was really struck by Reverend Cavanis for the first time, because for months she was telling us personally and behind closed doors, saying, I don't know how to talk about the war in Iran to my congregation. I'm not completely sure how to talk about all of this. And in some ways, that I think it also maybe came from a place of fear, and also knowing, like, how do you be a
Put it
leader?
this way, lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence.
Of how it would be received.
And on Sunday, she really strongly, in her sermon, talked about, made us take a stand on war, where she said, this war that this country has no business being a part of. And I just felt like we're seeing the churning of something new. And I just wanted to, like, lift up what you two have been raising about. The moment we're in is the moment for the people, and this is our role too, the moment for the people to put an end to war for once and for all. Like, put an end to a government that makes war for once and for all. And to basically unite and struggle for peace.
I also wanted to say, I like the point that you had raised about invoking Frederick Douglass at this point not being quite enough, because I mean any criticism of democracy as it is, and then vision for the future must at this point embody the world situation. I also appreciate a lot how you guys set up the discussion today, because when you both were speaking, I actually thought back to when we first spent a lot of time making sense of October 7th in 2023. And I remember something that you had said, Tony, that we framed the transcript of your remarks around was, the world has changed. And we said that back in October, almost 3 years ago. And I really feel like we're seeing the fruition of that development in a positive way, in terms of just the raising and the unifying of the moral consciousness of the world's people. So I just really like the way that you had set that up. Just wanted to add that.
We've moved over into the July 4th event now.
Yeah.
Because I want to say something about that too, but the question of the church.
I could say about. I agree with Emily that I was quite anxious, to be honest, ahead of the event because of how hot it was, and because, yeah, like if we were right, and I guess we are right, that most people don't feel like celebrating, the easiest option is for people to just stay home and to not engage in anything and maybe just have a barbecue or something. And I'm sure many people did that. But to be honest, I'm not sure how to make sense of it, but I was a little bit overwhelmed with not just the amount of people who came, but yeah, like Emily was saying, how hungry they were for the kind of discussion that we ended up having. And I think it really proved to me in ways that I hadn't maybe fully concretely realized, like what our role can be in this city. And I think more importantly, like what it is that people are looking for. And I just wanted to highlight and Alice, you should feel free to chime in too, but ahead of the July 4th event, we had independent meetings with Jasmine, who was one of the readers of the Declaration, as well as Kaimisha and Naima. And Naima is Doc's granddaughter, and she was one of the readers. And Kaimisha is her mother. And part of the reason why we wanted to have those meetings with them is because we didn't want people to read the Declaration if they didn't agree with it. And that was important because we wanted people to read with conviction and with belief. And with energy also. And honestly, again, I wasn't sure how, like, because if people have read it, we go pretty hard in the Declaration. Like I don't think we hold back a lot. And we make a lot of connections, but we make a lot of arguments. And there's parts of it that are pretty intense. And so with like Naima, for example, because she's in high school, right?
She's 13.
Yeah. Like we weren't sure how she would. Yeah, we weren't sure how she would respond, as well as her mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were so. I think as we were reading, because we rehearsed reading out loud the Declaration together with both groups, and I feel like as Jasmine was reading it for the first time out loud, she was like, "Whoa!" Like, where did we like? It was not like she was like confused by it, but she was also a little bit confused of like, "How did you guys write this?" She was like, "How did you guys put this together?" And she wanted to know basically like what our writing process was. But she was so immediately affirming of like, "This is what needs to be said," and she had this spirit, like this kind of immediate reaction of like, "This is a historic gathering." And reading this Declaration is something like I want to share with more people that I know. And I don't know, it was really humbling in some ways. And same with Kaimisha, Naima's mom. I think she had that immediate response of this is how people should be talking in this time. And yeah, so I think part of my reflections related to that were that I think it also helped me to realize in some ways, like, not just free school, but, and then we'll get into this with the avant-garde discussion, but I think the event really reaffirmed to me that I do believe that we're doing what we believe revolutionaries in the 21st century should be doing. And I actually have never felt more convinced that whatever it is that we would have pictured maybe a Martin Luther King doing or something like that, in the free school we're trying to do that. Right. And if we find other things that are better, we'll move towards that. But really right now in this time, it really did reaffirm my belief that we're doing what revolutionaries should be doing in this city in this time.
Mhm.
And part of that is, I think there were like three things that I kind of reflected on about free school itself that I hope people are okay with. But first is, I think this is something that I got from Jasmine, but I think sometimes we forget how important it is that the free school is so consistent, and that we're both morally consistent and also just politically consistent, and that we're always here, and that we're a place where people know where we are, they know who we are, and anytime that anyone wants to engage in this kind of struggle, in these kinds of ideas, they know exactly where to find us. And I think that's a reflection of also the moral commitment that we have. The second part that I was reflecting on is, like Emily and others were saying, that we have a sense of the fierce urgency of now. And the political, what we are trying to identify as a political imperative of this moment,
Yeah.
aside cutting through all of the noise and the chaos, the confusion that's out there, and trying to put forward, this is what we think is the political imperative this time. Connecting the 250th to the war, for example, stuff like that. And I think that that's important. And like, I really got that sense even from listening to the part of the WURD conversation, because it felt to me like so, like, what are you saying? Like, it felt like there wasn't any energy into it until basically you brought up what you did in that discussion. And then I think the third part is, and hopefully it's reflected in Avant-Garde, but I think the other part of free school that I really appreciate is the creativity that we have, and that we're not like a kind of fixed and static, dogmatic organization, but that we're always striving for new and better ways to express and to try to communicate and talk with people, and to bring different combinations of people together as well, into a serious dialogue. So, yeah, those are my
did want to say something about Iran before we went on to the event, because Jeremiah said, "Oh, Samir probably knows the history of those cities." But actually, embarrassingly, I really don't. Sorry, I don't really know anything about Shia Islam. Because from the Sunni perspective, the Prophet dies, the transmission is over, and there's no point in learning history after that because it's human history, it's not divine history. So, but there was a point in time when Iran was a Sunni majority country, not really a country, when Persia was Sunni Muslim. And so a lot of the poets and the scholars of Arabic are Sunni as well. And in modern times, it's become a contest between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and all these countries to hold on to the authority of Islam for political purposes. But in reality, people like Salahuddin, who was a famous Muslim leader during the Crusades, was actually Kurdish, and but his identity was Muslim, and his identity to the European world was Saracen. But Reza Aslan has this book on Islam, No God But God, and he basically relates the academic understanding of Islam, which was basically it was a religion that came off of the Silk Road from Mecca and Medina, and it inherited Roman law. It inherited Roman tradition. And Reza Aslan says the idea of the hijab came from Byzantine upper class women who would cover their hair. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm making the argument that America's interaction. I'm going to loop it back into July 4th. I'm making the argument that America's interaction with Islam is actually the people who inherited Roman civilization, the real inheritors of Aristotle, the people who really, when Europe was in the Dark Ages, it was, North Africans and Arabs. But people don't want to admit this. I was talking to my coworker, and he said, "Oh, the Spanish people, they're tan, but they're not brown. I got bad news for you. There's a reason they're so grand. It's North Africa, and you saw a lot of that during FIFA. But to bring it back, the first country to recognize the United States was Morocco, but back then it was the triarchy, was the tri-state. I forget what they called themselves, but the languages, their ships were attacking American ships, and the Americans asked why, and they said, well, we can attack you because under the laws of Islam, if we don't have a formal relationship with you, we can raid you. So that was a formal relationship. There was a peace agreement signed. I wanted to say I've been listening to Gerald Bourne recently because I don't want to listen just to people who confirm my opinion. But it's so hard to listen to because he is from a different tradition now. Even though he is formerly the Communist Party, but there's certain things that just don't come into his calculus, which if he didn't just avoid, there would be huge centers that he can't ignore, like Winston, like King, like Paul Robeson. But he belongs to this left that says, the U.S. is a Hitler colony. Everything that the U.S. did is evil. Actually, the history of this country doesn't begin in 1776. It begins in 1619. And he disparaged people who critique him by saying, "Oh, my friends on the left won't say that there's something redeemable about this country." But when for example, coming from the free school, when we're introduced to Afro-America in perspective with India, or in perspective with all these other countries, or the international struggle, the Soviet Union, when it's not what Winston called narrow nationalism, like this Afro-American centered nationalism, which is just like, oh, what's good for my people in the short term. It's different from Fidel or Gromesh and Paul Robeson, quite frankly, the spirit of international solidarity and friendship. And that's where we come in with the free school. Because when you look at the American Revolution from the perspective of an Indian, how can you say, Dr. Gerald Horn, that, oh, the English were on the progressive side of that conflict? Like, no, I don't think so. And I wish I could have made the argument better during the event, but I feel like one of the arguments that Du Bois would make is that the American Revolution was separating the American continent and Europe and its destiny. And what is happening in the current context with Iran and NATO is America separated from Europe, not in the way that we expected it to unfold, but it is unfolding. The collapse of Europe. So I mean, I guess that's my argument as to why. The last thing I wanted to say is there's this trend in the larger left. There is this trend of being pessimistic about past revolutions. First and foremost, I would say, the French Revolution, and people critiquing the French Revolution from a postmodernist perspective. I mean, quite frankly, people are just, in the struggle of ideas, the way I interpret it is, people are throwing up their hands and saying, "Oh, what's the point of a French Revolution? What's the point of struggling toward modernity?" That's the postmodernist perspective. And Gerald Horn is the American version of that, where he throws up his hand and says, "What's the point of an American Revolution?" And I would argue, this is what people have always said about this. Is what counter-revolutionaries have always said about revolutions, was that they caused more mess than they solved. So would you undo the French Revolution? This is what people would say about the Russian Revolution, that it wasn't a step forward, that it was a step back. And, I think that Gerald Horn is in that category of thinking.
And he's in the school. There is a school of thought that claims to be revolutionary, and all they believe in is destruction. To be a revolutionary in the United States means to commit oneself to the destruction of the United States. And therefore there is no positive program. So if you say Well, did you listen? I know he and others did a webinar, and I didn't get a chance on the 5th of July. I didn't get a chance to listen to it. But yeah, the concept that America has always been and will always ever be a counter-revolutionary society. And Black people are more or less trumped, not just isolated, marginalized because we are a minority. White people are a undifferentiated mass who are incapable of anything. And so a revolutionary must be committed to destroying the United States. Now, that will not resonate with anybody, Black, white, Latino, Asian. No people who live in a nation or a society, for the most part, will say that I will sign on to a revolution that destroys the society and my children and my grandchildren that I live in. And I think that's why the Declaration was grasped by so many people, because it was about a positive way forward.
Well, I wanted to say with the Declaration, it was also a process, I think, in working with Jasmine and Kamisha, Jasmine, Kamisha, and Naima, because I think in some ways it was also a testable hypothesis for us, meaning we had this idea that the people would not sign on to a violent revolution. But I think in the free school, we've also asked the question that is a possibility. And increasingly with the free school in our work, we're trying to understand what is it actually that the people think, constantly trying to get closer to the broad masses of people. I know in the free school, it is for anyone who is in revolutionary politics or seeks to be with the masses, know that actually it's really hard to, first of all, figure out where are people today. Because while we see the church as an institution, we also recognize that the membership has decreased. There's less trust as well in the church. And so this question of where are the people at, what are they thinking, is also a question for the free school, as we're trying to also understand where the people are at. And I think what was moving in the process of working with Jasmine, Kamisha, and Naima is that it affirmed that there is a want for a positive vision, meaning for the masses of people, do they want America and this nation to just go down? This means that your children, yourself, are going to have to suffer until anything changes. And essentially what we heard is that no, if there is a way in which we don't have to successively go through destruction before we can finally reach a change in the society, then I will sign up for that. And
I want the weapon that heals.
Right.
A weapon that heals, not a weapon that is completely committed to destruction. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that has to be the question that you ask if you have children or care about children in society. As someone, as a revolutionary, is your strategy destruction? And is that aligned with what the broad masses of people are thinking? And I think that was what we essentially saw through bringing in Jasmine, Kamisha, Naima as well. And I think that was also the surprising factor, where a lot in this society is telling them, or telling all of us, that it can only get worse. We were trying to put forward a positive vision. And I think it's also our work in trying to understand despite we see a positive consciousness among the people, but we're also fighting countercurrents where people don't have a place in which they have a collective, or not that there isn't, but that it has to be fought for, where there is a collective voice. What would a mass of people say on July 4th, where it says, we declare these truths, we are all created equal, so forth. And I think in us putting together the vision or the declaration, hearing those positive was for the response, for us gauging how people are responding, also spoke to, like, I think it helped to reaffirm that we are trying to build what would the people say, and that what we have put together is not removed from what people are thinking about, but might not necessarily have the language or voice for it right now. I think the other thing that was interesting about the event as a whole is that I think it's really hard to get people out nowadays, because there's a lot of BS, and people come and then they're disappointed with what people have to say. And what was encouraging is also that people not only came, but also stayed, because we had a large contingent as well of people who just so happened to end up at the event because they were at Mother Bethel. And what was an indicator for me is that I was trying to observe what the children actually that ended up at this event how they were responding to the event. Because I think children, like you were saying, Doc, in the event, is that children, there is a higher moral standard. They don't put up with things that are not true. And once they get a sense that there is any sense of duplicity or cowardice, they're already tuned out. And I think a lot of the children that were there, part of it is that when you're young, or like you're trying to joke around with your friends, you saw a couple of kids were, I don't know, just hanging out, chilling, and trying to be disruptive as children. But I think actually you saw over the course of, sometimes there were some were falling asleep, sometimes some were playing around, but then you saw through the course of that actually parts of their awakening in some ways. I think one of the kids that were fooling around, when you said it is not just Trump that is corrupt, we have a society that's corrupt, he woke up and was like, yeah. And I think that showed essentially the possibility of, it's not that people are disengaged, but it is that people are waiting for the true definition of what that field of struggle is. And I say that to say it's not going to be easy in the sense of constantly having to win people over, that consistency, the moral consistency, and where, the field of struggle. I think because we've been asking this question at Birmingham and young children too, and how is it that you're not just speaking down to young children or having everything to teach young children, but actually how you bring them into the struggle, that they feel that they are also contributors of a movement. And so the field of struggle being as defined of who is part of the struggle, who are those that can be part of the struggle, and then also what are the ideas of that struggle upon which we fight. And just that single observation from that kid is that, in some ways, this young child, I guess the way that I read it is that they're seeking for something that is the whole of society, a remaking of society. If he thinks that it's not just Trump that's the problem, and that it's the whole of society that's the problem, then what he's essentially saying is that just because you take Trump down doesn't mean anything really or not that it doesn't mean anything, but that alone is not sufficient. There is a moral remaking of the entire society that is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I wanted to talk about the nihilism that I feel like is always like the nihilism and pessimism that basically is always an option. And I feel like in some ways it flared up or was a big question for me around July 4th, where I feel like there was in some ways a tension between those who came to the event, said, yes, it's bad and this empire needs to die, but we believe that there can be a world making. Because I think the thing is that for people to show up means that they actually believe that there can be struggle or that there can be a future. And I feel like part of the tension is that on like the right basically just wants to say rah rah, like go America, always perfect, nothing's wrong with this country. But then I feel like on the other hand, like the left or like the progressive left, whatever, like the liberals, you don't really have anything to say about July 4th. And there's almost like nothing to celebrate. And I feel like it is the Gerald Horne like perspective of this country was wrong to begin with. It never should have existed. We should just let it all burn and we should like let it die and we should be happy. And I feel like in some ways that attitude is also one that says, let's step back, like let's retreat because this country was never meant for us to begin with. And like it doesn't deserve anything from us. And really like what we should do is protect ourselves and isolate ourselves from the fallout that is to come. And I feel like in some ways like that can be I think that can be convincing to some people because there's a lot of fear and there is a lot of like, well, I have to risk myself and I don't know like what's going to come of it. But in some ways I feel like that is, I mean, it is a position that's against struggle. Like it basically says you don't need to do anything. You don't have any responsibility and this country is doomed. And I feel like the thing is that people who have that, like people who hold that position, I think often want to say, well, actually I have high consciousness. I have a high understanding of history. And I know that this country like has always been genocidal and racist and like evil and bad. But I think the question is like, what do we actually see as the point of human consciousness, which is like, I think a sense of agency or a sense of responsibility and a sense of like moral conviction and wanting to be with people to struggle. And yeah, I just felt like there was a big like tension or a big divide between people who I think feel that they know everything already versus the people who say, I know enough, but I don't let that knowledge like keep me from acting. I want to actually be with people in the struggle. And yeah, and I think part of like, even when we say that the empire does have to die or that like something has to be like, I do think something has to be destroyed. Like white supremacy has to be destroyed. These values that prioritize war and death, those do have to be destroyed. But I feel like equally important for us is like, what is actually going to come out of that? Who are the people? And I feel like part of what we see as really important in the political process is like the people finding each other, the people creating a beloved community, creating like a basis of trust and a basis of saying like, oh, these are the people who are in the struggle with me. And together, like we will find out. And yeah, I think part of what I also thought was interesting is that at the event, in some ways, people's minds always jump sort of immediately to like, how are we going to do this? Like, how are we going to actually like move forward? How are we going to save the children? All of that. And I feel like in some ways, like you can see it, I think both like positively and negatively, where I think on the one hand, I think it shows that people do feel the fierce urgency of now. Like people do feel like actually something needs to be done and we have to do something about it. But I feel like the other side of it is, yes, we need to figure out how, but also who is actually going to be involved. And yeah, like on what basis are we going to come together? And so I thought that the fact that people felt in some ways comfortable saying like, I trust these people and I think that together we actually should figure out how, says something. And in some ways, I think that's kind of where I see like part of the point of like the democratic forums or like the freedom forums, which is to say that we believe that we have relationships or that we're a place in the city where people who want to find a solution can come
Mm.
and can know each other better. And like only through actually like being together and talking together can we find like a real solution. Yeah, but I feel like the July 4th event was very affirming to show that people do want to struggle and not basically between the gap of like passive nihilism and then like blind delusion. There is a middle way, which is actually like looking at the people, believing in the democratic capacity of the people and trying to find like a creative way. And in some ways, I feel like that's also like, I feel like that's how King described it too, where there were like the separationists who did not want to actually struggle to make America a new country. And then there are sort of like the white people who are like, oh, like everything is fine, like there's no problem. And then King was like, can we be courageous enough to find a third way, a true way, that actually resonates with the people? And I feel like in some ways, like I also see it as like, I don't know, I guess religious and spiritual too, because I feel like it is the question of redemption. And I think that it, like the cynical, like nihilistic way, I feel like it becomes possible to just say like, there's no possibility, like we cannot be redeemed. Like we're all going to hell and we should just like accept it. And I feel like in some ways we have to believe that there is like a possibility for the future or a sense of redemption. And that in that concept, like redemption requires sacrifice. But ultimately, like there is a future, there is something to strive for. Yeah, and then I think there were a lot of comments too. And so I think Jahan had a string of comments, but he's also on the Zoom. So
Oh yeah, we have Jahan and Neha on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
but if Jahan wants to speak. Jahan, do you want to speak? Okay.
Sorry, one second.
I'm very struck by this discussion. And first, on this point about July 4th and the fact that pretty much all the analysis I saw from the left, including Gerald Horne, but many others, was this thesis that America has always been a settler nation, and that I mean, I won't repeat what others have said, but that essentially it boils down to this perspective. I would say we could classify as historical nihilism or maybe even political nihilism, that it's not just an argument about the problems of the American Revolution or the founding fathers, I mean, which obviously we also agree with. It is an argument that the American people and America is fundamentally incapable of revolutionary change. And it is basically an anti-struggle, an anti-people position, because for us, the history of America and the future of America is not the American state, not the American elites, not white supremacy, but it is the people as agents of change. And to adopt this settler thesis is to completely ignore and belittle the achievements of the people, including Reconstruction, including the Civil Rights Movement, including the Third American Revolution, the achievements of institutions like Mother Bethel, which were crucial in the struggle against slavery. Today, we're also speaking about Iran and the Islamic Revolution. This position would be to belittle the achievements of the Nation of Islam, of Black Islam in America. All of these things are what we identify as foundational to the struggle for revolutionary change in America, because they give not only Black people, but all conscious people and moral people in America a foundation on which to fight from. And so I really just appreciated the fact that Free School had done this deep dive on settler colonialism, because I agree with Nuri, it is an attractive thing for young people who are very angry and frustrated, but it is not a foundation stone on which to fight. And as we've kind of made the argument a long time ago, even though it is radical rhetoric, it is something that's more comfortable in the university classrooms and the ivory towers than it is among the people. And it is something that the ruling class is very comfortable with, because essentially it shuts off any pathway to struggle. And I agree with what Jeremiah had said earlier. I think that for us in the free school, we see the reason that we so much emphasize ideological work in this moment is because we see that it is essential to basically study history, study sociology, and help the people and help ourselves to develop that option, that pathway to struggle, that pathway to identify what is the way to revolutionary change, what is the way for the people to act on their moral impulses. And it is obviously not simply voting. It is not simply retreating into the ivory tower. It is not simply, to engage in all kinds of rhetoric. It is something much deeper and more sophisticated than that. And so, yeah, I was just struck by the fact that neither the ruling class nor the left had much to say about the 250th, whereas we believe there is a future. And also just wanted to try to connect that with the discussion on Iran. And I think that the funeral of the late Ayatollah Khamenei was really a deep ideological and civilizational mobilization of the people of Iran and beyond, as Jeremiah said, against white supremacy. I think they were signaling that they're prepared to move forward with the movement of history.
Yeah.
And that they're identifying themselves with the struggle of the martyred supreme leader against a world order, a white supremacist world order that believes that the security of the white West can be used to justify the worst crimes, including the murder of non-white children at will.
Yeah.
And so I agree with Doc that people united so ideologically and spiritually are very, very difficult to defeat. And it was also a great Pan-Asian and Pan-African moment because among these millions of people were delegations from many neighboring nations, Asian nations and African nations and Latin American nations, but also people from civil society, religious leaders from these neighboring states and not so neighboring states, and all intellectuals and others. So all of this, I think, is darker humanity. Identifying with the struggle of Iran and the Iranian Revolution and these theological principles which they've identified, the primacy of the struggle against oppression. And I completely agree with Doc. We don't really have, it's difficult to identify the exact number, but a large amount of Americans are beginning to see a friendly people, a friendly civilization in Iran. And they're increasingly disgusted with this criminal war that's taking place. And I think all of that brings us to July 4th and the kind of intervention that the free school is making in the 250th year of the US to give the people, to contribute to giving the people at least a pathway to principled unity with the struggle of the people of Iran, of darker humanity, and the way forward. And I think, I'll save my comments on Avant-Garde for later, but I think that even though all the work that we put into Avant-Garde and the articles we selected and the figures that we're studying, the history that we're studying, the sociology that was conducted, all of it is to identify the achievements of the people, the achievements of the Black freedom struggle as a foundation for the American people in this moment where they are looking for a new foundation stone. They clearly know the old white foundation stones will not serve us and will only degrade us into becoming the worst kinds of criminals and barbarians that Trump has become.
I think I wanted to agree with Jahan in what he said about the importance of ideological work, because I feel like when you look at the Democratic Party and their entire byline, which is we have to defeat Donald Trump, what happens after that? What happens after 2028 when he's gone? Because if you don't put in that ideological foundation for what comes next, there is no real revolution. I think, a few of us are studying Ramesh Fidel, and when we were discussing, I think we discussed something that Fidel said, which is that the real revolution is when you start building the state up. It's not in trying to wrestle the control of the state as much as it is to build up the state afterwards, to build up its people, to lead this moral revolution. And I think I just wanted to add something to what Alice said, which is how the children reacted to this statement of, oh, Trump is not the only problem. Society is the real problem, and they seem to recognize that. And I noticed that as well, and I was didn't really know how to feel about that in that moment, but I feel like it's true. What Even when you think about so many people talking about it is the economy and the resource drain that is eventually going to wake up the people and lead this revolution. I feel like the people have been feeling this for a while now. People have been feeling not just economic strain, but what we're actually doing to our souls when we attack children in a land, and you can sort of have this separation between the American people and the Iranian people as much as you want, but children are children.
Yeah.
And when you see them being slaughtered, somewhere it must hurt. I think I'm hurt when I think about that. And I think it's really easy to think about the economy. I know there are a lot of people online, at least, have been saying that, the gas prices are stable now, but we've been going through a lot of the U.S. reserve oil to maintain that level. Strategic reserves. And now it's going to fall. And with the gas prices rising, that's going to sort of lead an uprising. But I feel like that momentum is already there. I feel people are already dissatisfied, and not just because of rising fuel prices. But it is very easy to lean into cynicism and nihilism, as you mentioned. I remember that the week before the event, I was out in West Philly putting up flyers, and I was just putting up flyers on each of the poles on the traffic signals. And this black man who was at one of the bus stands, he comes up to me and says, "What is this about?" So I tell him what this is about, and I hand him a flyer and I said, "I hope you can make it." And he said, "Are you being paid for this?" And I said, "No, I do this because I believe that the people deserve this." And he hands me back the flyer and said that, "I don't have anything to celebrate. I'm lost." And he kind of just walks away, and I try to catch up to him, and he sort of waves me away. And I think that made me really anxious about the event. And I think I was trying to keep it to myself as well. And I was thinking, how many people are going to come out with this cynicism around the 4th of July. But I think I was really happy that a lot of children came. A lot of children came, stayed the whole event, and were actually paying a lot of attention. I was constantly looking back at the children, and there were these people who were upright, straight, and looking ahead. Because I think that they heard something that they recognized with, and then they heard hope, which is not something I feel like they hear a lot. And when I saw that, and the entire event as well made me think of King in one of his sermons, I forget which, where he says that a lot of people here think that America can be fixed. And I'm here to tell you that America can't be fixed. It needs to be remade. It needs to be remade around a foundation that is built around morality. And I feel like the more that people congregate around that ideology, I feel like the ropes that hold up that bridge is going to be erected, and it is being erected, and it has continued to be erected since the time of Reconstruction. And yeah, I felt positive about the event quite a lot. And I do want to say one small thing about the Iran situation, and this might be a little out there, but I feel like the FIFA World Cup that is happening in the US has brought the American people very close to the Iranian people, especially with the Iranian national team coming here on the US soil and being treated unjustly, unfairly. And I think a lot of people have been against that as well.
Yeah.
And you can really see in real time, while this country hosts a international event, that they are being just a morally depraved nation, making the Iranian national team fly in from Tijuana, Mexico, the days of the matches and leave right afterwards. They have to spend like 3-4 hours on the flight, another 3-4 hours in immigration, and then play a match and then go back. And they were eliminated in the group stages, but they were undefeated like they were in the war. And I think that the Iranian national football team also embodies the ideology of the Iranian people. There's this defender called Ramin Rezaian, who I really like. And, you know, during the news conferences after the match, they were not being asked questions about football. They were being asked questions about the political situation in the world. And they were so dignified in their responses. And I think I really like Ramin's response where he said, after their last match, he said, I'm here representing my people. My people deserve all the happiness in the world, and I hope I can provide that to them. And believe me, I've never heard an international football player say this. They talk a lot about their country and making them proud, but about their people. I think that this is civilizational in the Iranian people. And this same guy, Ramin, he posted after Ayatollah Khamenei was assassinated. Iran had already qualified for the World Cup, and he posted saying that I will be a soldier for Iran in the national team. I think they view things very differently. In whatever they do on an international stage, they view things very differently from what the Americans are used to. And I feel like their presence in the United States and the way that they fought really made the American people see what the Iranian people are about.
Did we want to move to Avant-Garde?
I'll just say one more thing about this. This is very, very important. How, the people side of all of this. And certainly we have to take into account the way children see things. And, Stevie Wonder had a song with a child's eyes. I think it's and sometimes I wish I tried to see things through a child's perspective. Children don't like seeing children killed like this. They don't like seeing anybody killed. But they don't like seeing the Iranian football team treated so poorly, or the fact that there's evidence that FIFA was cheating on behalf of European countries and Argentina, but I think I agree with everything you're saying, that in events like this and so on, we're seeing people struggling with moral questions. And we're seeing children growing up quickly, but not in a bad way. I'm reminded of my granddaughter, who I was looking at while I was up there speaking. and she's 13 years old. And I'm still trying to figure out why she was so, the whole time, just looking at me and listening, and of course her reading of the document. But the element of children and almost a reverse where elders often think they have everything to teach children and nothing to learn. I think we have come to the conclusion, that's why the Philadelphia as a 21st century Birmingham, and by Birmingham we mean the Birmingham movement, and by the Birmingham movement we mean the children and youth of Birmingham. This is huge, and that's why the positive perspective of saying always to the people, but to children, there is a sky.
Yeah.
And that this ultra revolutionary thing of there's nothing that we can do but destroy. And I think also the option that we keep talking about of a nonviolent people's democratic movement. And let's not get it confused. The revolutionary struggle that is before us is a struggle for a people's democracy, And we learn so much, by the way, from Iran, the way they govern their society, the mosaic, we'll talk more about that, or what we've learned in the way the people govern themselves in China, 1.5 billion people. How do you govern such a huge population? Well, you don't govern from above. The people govern themselves. We saw that with the funeral processions. I mean, to the best of our knowledge, no one was killed. Maybe, it was so hot, maybe someone could have had a stroke or something. But the discipline in grieving and mourning, and they grieved. And even some of the people who came, the official delegations, as they approached the government leaders of Iran, was very moving to me to see grown men, just uncontrollable grief. The loss of Ayatollah Khamenei. This is a huge event. When people from, well, by the way, no European people were invited. By the way, I think the only American who would have been invited, had his health permitted it, would have been Minister Farrakhan, because of his closeness to the Iranian.
He visited Iran.
Yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It makes sense. I mean, Black America is not seen as America. But just, if I could just say one last point. I thought the event, and we cannot make light of the fact that over 100 people came. And that the music, Jillian, singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic in the Paul Robeson style of 1948, and then Osiris Wildfire singing Freedom in the Richie Havens mode. And then, there was a person that I now realize that I probably knew about, and that was Brian Evans, the former football player for the Eagles. And I've never seen such when I say a huge, I'm talking about his shoulders. He was a linebacker, a huge guy, and it turns out a gentle giant. This was in microcosm, and let's keep it real. We're still dealing with the microcosmic thing. We have not yet broken through. So in microcosm, everything from Mother Bethel to the Nation of Islam to the children, good part of them coming from Arizona, to the Jasmine Banks and her family, Sydney and Sadiq, you know, and, you know, because, you know, families and marriages are not always ideologically united. Y'all don't know nothing about that, but it's nothing worse than an ideological struggle within a family. Well, I see John shaking his viewpoint. But to see in that family ideological unity, or to see Kaimisha and Naima ideologically united, mother and daughter. I'm not saying that the boys and my son, who's not in the family anymore, you know, I don't know whether, you know, the boys are as ideologically united as Kaya, Misha, and Naima are, mother and daughter. But I want to say that what we saw in microcosm was a kind of ideological unity that must occur as we go forward. And it's hard to say enough about Reverend Cavaness and her generosity and her, well, the ideological unity. And by, you know, I just want to clarify what we mean. We're talking about people who are united around ideas, positive ideas. And of course, it is King, and the church. And this is, again, I'm talking a lot, forgive me. Our strategic decision to build in the churches, in the mosques, in the religious organizations of the people, there is, for Black folk, there is no alternative. And so one could be whatever religion or not religion that one is. You cannot respect Black people and disrespect their primary and fundamental institutions. Black people are in churches for a reason. Black people believe in their gods for a reason, you know? And I was, Armstead, I was saying to Armstead, I was asking him if, because he's an artist, and I was saying, do you listen to gospel music? And he said, not much, you know? And I said, well, I kind of grew up on it, but I got away from it, you know, all this and that and the other. But I listen to gospel music because I'm trying to understand when people say God, what are they saying? It's obvious that they're not saying what white people are saying. You know, and frankly, we're not saying that white people will always remain in the in this place of spiritual wilderness, which they are. You know, like Du Bois said, if religion is a nation, reflects a nation, then white religion is fair. I mean, there is no, And so to talk about Black people, you have to understand their religion, the music that comes out of the church, you know, the art that comes out of the church, the oratory. Just one last thing. But Birmingham, and let us not forget that King and Abernathy and Shuttlesworth and Wyatt T. Walker and most of them were not pastors in a church. So when King talked about a different ecclesia is community. If the church is slow to move, then where do you find the spiritual community? You know, where is it found? And how is it deployed in the struggle for freedom? And by freedom, I think when we say freedom in the free school, we're talking about a new democracy, a different democracy, a people's rule.
Okay, maybe I can read comments and then we can transition to the discussion on avant-garde. Okay, Lao Tzu said, Grand Rising in the 534th year of the Mahdi, the great disaster that occurred to African people and the majority of non-European people with the voyage of Christopher Columbus to the west. Nathan Reddy, someone named Airwolf, and Bambala and Todd say good morning. Someone named Rami asked, whose interest does your government serve? And then Lao Tzu asked, in terms of leadership, is centralized leadership a characteristic of the European cultural matrix? What are the traditional cultural leadership models of non-European people? Then asked, what kind of soldiers bomb schools, funeral processions, hospitals, and fishermen? What humanity do senators and congressional members have who are silent on these activities? And from the establishment of the colonies that involved into the USA, when has this entity not been actively involved in genocide and war? Okay. Bambalai agrees that, yes, the US is a damn criminal regime, says confidence in the betterment of the US is hard to have these days.
Yeah.
And then Todd said, senators and congressional members have sold their souls for the almighty dollar. And Lao Tzu responded and said, yes, Todd, thanks for your response. My question is not about the actions that members of the legislative branch may have taken. It's about the cultural matrix that inoculates and constitutes them. Bambalai says the American identity has always been diffuse, I should say fake. Uncle Sam, cowboys, the great frontiersman, the Star-Spangled Banner. And then iManifesto says, I've heard Dr. Horn emphasize the importance of internationalism as it relates to African liberation, says that a revolution is a dramatic or wide-reaching change, and that has to be a destruction of something in order for something new to exist. To heal is to restore to health. What is or was the healthiest version of this society or colonial state that is worthy or capable of being restored? Evil births opposition, and then said, I appreciate this synopsis of the free schools philosophy. I think, yeah, that was in response to Jahan. And then Lao Tzu asked, question for Doc, can you give examples of weapons that heal and weapons that countries and people have employed to maintain their ways of life? Then let's see. Lao Tzu also asked again to Todd, what are the cultural values and the understanding of the reality of those who make up the legislative branches or the ruling elite? What allows these members to disregard the environment and humanity in the way that they do? And then a new commenter named Just RM says, indeed, Iran has made it clear that they are willing to stand up, say no, fight back, and make sacrifices along the way. Currently, they're literally raising up for humanity. And Kari said, well said, Jahan, and Just RM and others concur with Kari. And then Lao Tzu also asked, how pervasive is this whiteness in general society? Bambalai says, hometown Arizona, and then shouts out Arizona. And Kari had responded and says, whiteness is the standard to which general society has strived to meet for hundreds of years. And then Nathan commented on Avant-Garde, saying, Magna's essay in Avant-Garde showed the moral civilizational context of Indian American youth feeling parental pressure to succeed in America. It's much, much more than culture clash, but that's obscured. The West propaganda is that Iran is oppressive to women. And then brings up like the comic book Persepolis and says, then the first casualties are little girls and the mirror is calling.
Yeah.
And then those are our comments.
Okay, we're gonna transition, like Neri said, to now a discussion of the new issue of Avant-Garde. Neha and Jahan are also joining us for that part. And we wanted it to be not just like the editors of the journal, but especially people who contributed to various parts of it to kind of talk and explain, I guess, the political purpose of the journal and why we put it together and the streams of ideas that are contained within it. And I just wanted to start by saying that we've always seen Avant-Garde as an expression of the free school and the ideological currents that are always moving within the free school. And oftentimes we'll start an issue, like let's say 4 months back, 5 months back, without knowing exactly where free school is going. And I think a lot has happened since we started the ideological process of the journal. And as part of that, the ideas within it, as people were writing together, that was changing constantly as we were developing it. But now that it's published, I think part of the reason why we felt that it would be good to have this discussion is because it's both a reflection of and a crystallization of ideas that have been kind of in development in the free school. And we also wanted to use it to, in some ways, re-inject those ideas back into our discourse, the ways that we talk, the kinds of discussions that we have both on these Saturdays, but also with different people, with different people's institutions for the remainder of the year. And so I just want to say that, like, I think to take a step back, we had a while ago, after we had written the declaration, we had come to the theme of this issue being dedicated to that idea of the battle for a new civilization, which comes out of the declaration that we wrote. And actually, this was the first issue that we wrote, which was not dedicated to a specific individual, although obviously Martin Luther King is featured prominently on the front cover. And we knew that this issue would be timed around July 4th. We didn't know exactly actually what day it was, and so things kind of converged, and we were like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do the launch of the issue as part of the July 4th event. But just to kind of comment on that, I think others can say more too, but I think actually it's kind of interesting that the civilization piece, to me, is very important, because I think throughout the entire issue, you see people working with this idea of civilization,
Yes.
which has been a kind of core concept in the free school for many years. But I think especially, maybe not that many.
Yeah,
To me, it feels like maybe it's the entirety of the time I've been here. And I really feel like, even I was reflecting on it because when we had this meeting with Kaimisha and Naima about the declaration, I was like, oh, as we were reading out loud, I was like, oh, we're using this idea, this term civilization a lot. So it forced me to reflect on why we use that term and why we feel that that idea is in many ways what we feel is our strong hand of what we want to bring to people as something that can help frame the battlefield of struggle, the terrain of struggle that people can operate on. And the other thing I want to say is, even though we knew this issue would come out around July 4th, and we knew that probably the free school would be doing stuff, I actually think it's pretty important to say that, like, we didn't include articles that are kind of like what you'd see in the kind of bourgeois press of, like, what America means to me, or like articles on what the revolution of 1776 means, or that kind of stuff. In part because in some ways we'd already covered some of that with even like the first issue that we published a few years ago. Like, Jahan had written an essay on Gerald Horne, actually, if people remember. And so we've covered some of that ground. We also have done issues around what we call the Third American Revolution, trying to explore, and obviously we are always going to keep coming back to those ideas. But along with this idea of civilization, the big theme and the big kind of connecting tissue almost of the issue is what we have taken up as this project of revolutionary sociology.
Yeah.
And that is also an expression of some of us have been in these kind of sociology working groups. Like, we've been doing the sociological study of what we call the Black Gods movements, the Black Gods institutions, of the Prison Reform Ministry of the Nation of Islam, of deindustrialization. So a lot of especially the beginning of the issue is the manifestations of that collective process, which has involved a lot of people, both people within free school as well as the relationships that we build with different people's institutions. And I just want to say that the reason why I want to call attention to that is because, like I said at the beginning, I really believe that what we're trying to do in free school is what I believe revolutionaries should be doing in the city of Philadelphia in the 21st century. And as part of that, we have identified our task as the creation of new knowledge, new ideas, and especially a new, essentially Du Boisian, to advance Du Boisian sociology and revolutionary social science for this time, and to better understand and to know the people in the service of what can become a people's movement in the 21st century, like a 21st century Birmingham, like Doc said, a democratic people's movement, and that knowledge is essential for the achievement of that kind of movement. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that just to start things off. And the last piece is, I think I was reflecting on it even coming out of the event, because Doc, in your presentation at the July 4th event, you brought up so much this idea of who is man, who is God, a question that King raises. And the reason why we chose the specific cover image for this is actually it's from the funeral of Martin Luther King in Atlanta in '68. And we wanted to show not just an image of King, but of the people carrying Martin Luther King, of walking and marching underneath the banner of Martin Luther King. And that was why it actually, like, our discussion on Iran reminded me of this, because I think that what we feel in this time is that even with all of these different institutions that the people have built in this city and in general, we feel that the figure who allows us to unite all of these institutions is Martin Luther King. And it is under that banner with which the people can find each other. And that it's not just like in that sense, but it's also like, I feel like part of what is possible in this time is for King to become part of almost like the bloodstream of the people, to become part of the thinking and the action and the behavior and the moral center, the moral life world of the people in this time. So I just want to start with that. And I know Michelle and Neha and Jahan have something.
I also reflected a lot about Avant-Garde and what it means for work in the stage of preschool. We haven't put out an issue since last summer, and so we really spent a lot of time formulating the contents of the journal, but also the purpose of it. So I think similar to what Jeremiah said, I think it's an achievement that preschool and Avant-Garde are more united than ever. And the way that I had thought about this journal is that the creation of it actually felt like a political event. Like it felt like orchestrating a political event, and our launch of it with the continued distribution of it, I think will bear a lot of fruit depending on how we take up the journal. Similar to what Jeremiah said, I think it can really serve as a bridge, and King really being the overall anchor for that bridge between us and many institutions of Black life, but also us and cities beyond Philadelphia, us and the world, Black institutions amongst each other. And I also want to talk about the event a little bit, because I felt really struck by it, especially as someone who hadn't helped organize it. It's just, I feel like where we're at, and the journal as an expression of that, just looks so much like the beginnings of the movement, because we've really created that shared understanding and that very comprehensive assessment of reality that is the foundation on which people will come together and begin to actually act in a principled way. So, you know, the way that I've been thinking about this journal is just so much centered on this question of the political life of the journal and what it'll take, you know, like what shape it'll take. Let me see. I think Jeremiah and I, and also a couple of the editors, like Jahan and Neha, something that we had also talked about is how just the new quality of this issue and why, and the response to the feeling qualitatively new as well, that people really identify with the So that's something that you guys are emphasizing with the reading of the Declaration, but it's definitely something that our sociology subgroup identified with Brother Gregory's response to the prison reform ministry. How is it that more and more the people, people of goodwill across the city really find and identify with our expression of the crisis and its vision for the future? So I think part of what makes this issue like qualitatively special is it really feels like all of the contents within it reflect our call for the year of the 250th, but also literally advance it. And for especially the sociological reports, they take up the creation of that new knowledge or that blueprint for a movement alongside the people. So I say all of this to say that my concept of the journal is changing a lot in that I'm just really seeing it as a political vehicle. And I feel that it's very promising in that I hope this journal can be taken up by many people within preschool and beyond. And yeah, I'll start there, and then I guess we can talk about the contents.
Jahan and Neha, did you guys want to add anything?
Okay, I just wanted to add a little bit that I think a lot of the stuff that was already said, like a lot of it, I wanted to just repeat, and that spoke to me. Like one is, like I wanted to bring up like some of the points that were raised before, like the idea of civilization and democracy being so interlinked, and that we can see in the war itself too with Iran, like because these questions of who can govern and who has the right to determine the course of history are central to even how the war is proceeding, and and it is true that like on one side we have the white supremacist ruling elite, like, and the Zionist regime that wants to use like basically all of its military, economic, and political power for the sake of like protecting white supremacy and attacking its own people, the American people. And on the other hand, we have like the determined resistance of the Iranian people. And I really like the point that Nidhi had raised, which is that what is the purpose of human consciousness is to actually be able to create this like better world for everybody. And in some ways, the Iranian people have actually shown that in like standing up and to do this evil like white supremacist regime. They have shown that they are standing up for humanity, and that in that way, like the entire world's people have actually responded to them in how the funeral procession for the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has happened. But I also wanted to raise, like, I think when we were talking about the essays, we were also thinking about like this thing about the American people having withdrawn completely from this white supremacist regime in many ways, not just in terms of the war, but also in rejecting whiteness, and how like this withdrawal of the American people is itself like a death, like a certificate for the whites, for the US regime and the American civilization as it exists today. And at this point, like the American people are closer to seeing the people of the world and Iranian people, and this moral churning that everybody has been talking about, it is very clear for people to see. And yeah, this has just broken down. So yeah, just a lot of it, what the people were saying, it just it speaks to the conversation too, that we were having.
Yeah, I would just add to that as far as the issue as a whole, I think definitely I would agree that this is an intervention in the current political scenario, and it is really an intervention to, as we said earlier, to not to fix the country and the people, but to remake the nation and the people, and to clarify this point that we often say in free school, that the rejected stone of the Black proletariat and the Black freedom struggle must become the cornerstone of this society in order to resolve these contradictions and avoid the ruin of all people. And I definitely agree with Michelle as well, that I think this issue is a political event. There's been a lot put into this issue. I mean, I think the sociological study portion of it now has taken at least 9 to 10 months of very diligent and serious work. And I definitely think that the concepts of civilization and sociology are key concepts that come out in this issue. And I think that we believe that they are key concepts to the remaking of the nation and the people. And just a bit about the contents. Looking over them again after it's done, I was very struck by the fact that we kind of have a dialectical approach in the issue as a whole, because about half of the essays are actually critiques of what is happening, critiques of certain phenomena. We have a critique of the Epstein files. We have a critique of the immigration debates. We have a critique of basically the war and the need to understand it as a civilization war. And I think these three topics are still of great concern to the people, and they're still continue to dominate the headlines in the news. And so I think they're very relevant interventions. And then the other half of the journal, I mean, of course, is the declaration for the 250th, which is very important for the issue as a whole. But then also there's that positive sociological study of the achievements of the people. Definitely, I think the Black Gods essay is a very, very significant sociological study. And as I said, so much work has gone into it. And I think that when people read it, they will really see that it is a theoretical intervention. It is a concrete, empirical, and sociological intervention. And again, it's offering so much to the struggle. And then we have the study, concrete sociological study in many ways of two revolutionary lives. And we have the interview of Doc, and there's so much there about the revolutionary struggle, the world communist movement, the struggle within the Black community, and all of what that means for the crisis of this moment. And then, as Michelle alluded to, we also have this study of Brother Gregory Muhammad and the prison reform ministry and his struggle over 30 years inside the dungeons of America, but his struggle to maintain his dignity and to transcend beyond what the architects of the system wish him to become, and what that has to teach those who wish to struggle to change society. And so, I mean, that's kind of a synopsis of what we have. But I think when you put those together, we have that dialectical approach of both the critique and the positive sociological study of the achievements. And so I'm proud that we were able to put that together. And I'm, very anxious to see how it will be received by people.
One thing I'll say is, when we first started working on the sociology project a year ago, something that we began with was looking at King's campaign in the North, specifically in Chicago. And I remember this being something that we worked out, but we essentially had the hypothesis that the people in the city of Philadelphia, similar to the people of Chicago at that time, are looking for a force that can explain why injustice prevails in the city, or why things are the way they are, why evil is produced and reproduced. And I think this journal, maybe more than any other issue, tries to comprehensively address that question. What are the categories that actually explain why this crisis is constituted the way it is, and what concretely actually constitutes this crisis? And I know for the Prison Reform Ministry report, something that we agonized over and really were deliberate about was just addressing some of these concrete questions, criminalization, the state of the youth in the city, mass incarceration as a phenomenon. And I know that that's something that we will continue to pursue in our work as Free School. But I also think 1 year later, after the start of the study, what we have seen through the event and through the response to this issue is that it's true. This is really a uniting principle in the city, to know this crisis, to understand what's driving it, and then to understand what its resolution will be. And we've been very clear in asserting that it will be the Black worldview as an alternate civilization. And that's something that many people seem to resonate very strongly with. So I just wanted to say that in terms of why I was saying that I feel like this issue is of a new quality. And I think as a project of the rest of the year of our political work, we should continue thinking about how we will build upon it and how we will share this work. For example, the Prison Reform Ministry subgroup, something that we had considered was sharing our journal with Michelle Alexander, who is one of the preeminent scholars of mass incarceration in the 21st century, and to, dialogue, because so much of what's missing in the discourse about mass incarceration is the most successful program that has been able to combat it and has been able to address recidivism. The NOI, like Prison Reform Ministry program. And the rate of recidivism in the Nation of Islam is very close to zero, which is very, very unusual. But that has not been studied by the majority of intellectuals who are taking on this problem in American society. So that's just one example of how I see us continuing to bring political life to the journal.
Initially, I was like, oh, maybe we can have a roundtable discussion on the journal, but I don't think that would actually work. So we can keep it more informal. But I just think it would be, like, building on what Michelle was saying, I think it would be good to also talk about, like, especially people who contributed, if you guys have, like, reflections on, like, the process of putting it together. Like with the Black Gods report, for example, it's not like we included like a methodology section, but I do think it's worth kind of talking through like the journey we went through. And I can say something a little bit about that, but I think also like whether it's the sociological reports, the doc interview, or the individual articles, I think in all of those different pieces, we are making arguments for a certain worldview. We are presenting certain ideas forward. And I think it's worth talking through explicitly like what those different arguments and frameworks are that we're trying to put forward. And I guess I can start with the Black Gods and then others can chime in, but like I think in some ways, one of the questions that we came to was almost like, if the gods of white supremacy have failed, where will the people turn? And that kind of I feel like that has become a question that is suffused throughout the report. But I don't know if we like started with that question, but we kind of came to it. And the journey that we took to get there was we started out by reading like Arthur Fawcett's Black Gods of the Metropolis, his 1930 study, and we referenced that in the introduction. And that's a study of many of the respective institutions that we ended up talking with and building relationships with. And we also read E. Franklin Frazier and his sociological studies of Black people in America, but especially of the Black church. And then the third big sociologist who we looked at was obviously W.E.B. Du Bois and his understanding of the Black church. And I think actually my reflection of like why it was important that we actually looked at that kind of canon of sociologists and thinkers was because part of our assertion is that American society, its unique historical development, and especially the development of the Black freedom struggle in America, has yielded the possibilities for new revolutionary theory that goes beyond basically what has been contributed by the radical wing of the European Enlightenment, like Marxism and Leninism. And so we were really trying to, in a Du Boisian way, almost to, I guess, draw from Du Bois, but to also organically interact with these different institutions that have been built up over the past century, in Philadelphia in particular, as a way to try to articulate what we feel is new theory, new revolutionary science. And so we did that first by reading, but then also increasingly by like visiting these institutions. Like obviously we had a relationship with the Nation of Islam, but then the new institutions that we met with were the United House of Prayer for All People, especially the South Philadelphia Mother House of the United House of Prayer, and then Father Divine's International Peace Mission. And so we had like different groups that were going to those places and attending services. And we also did this tour of the Woodmont mansion, which is where the followers of Father Divine are. And we also interviewed Apostle Crawford at the South Philadelphia House of Prayer. And I don't know, for me, like, related to that question of if the gods of white supremacy in America failed, where will people turn? In some ways, the flip side of that question is, where are those places where the people are building institutions that are in resistance to or negate white supremacy with a new theology, a new worldview? And where are those institutions of resistance that exist among the people? And like, how have they also matured over time? But that was just like my initial reflection.
Yeah, I think our starting point with, in some ways, I think the starting point with taking what we're calling the Black Gods of Philadelphia seriously is, first of all, like Jeremiah was saying, the whole phrase of Black God of the urban North comes from Arthur Fawcett, who was the only person at that time in the early 20th century taking seriously what most people considered cults, quote unquote cults. Like this phenomena all in the first few decades after the defeat of Reconstruction. How do you explain the surgence of such interesting creative groups of Black folk in the urban North, Nation of Islam, under the leadership of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Sweet Daddy Grace's United House of Prayer with their street baptisms in places like Harlem, and then Father Divine's Peace Mission with such a huge presence in Philadelphia, where these gorgeous buildings are taken up by Black folk and giving full course meals to any person, including the poor and homeless, for free. And for us, like I think for me, like I remember we took it up seriously because we were introduced, first of all, like we were most familiar with the Nation of Islam in Philadelphia and that rich, strong history in a city like Philly, where there wasn't just Mosque number 12, but there was Mosque number 12A, Mosque number 12 like B, like so many mosques in the city because there were just so many people. But then some of us had gone to Washington, D.C. To see an art exhibit, and we were looking for a place to have lunch. And we had heard of this cafeteria from Megna, who had gone to this cafeteria that she said was wonderful. It's called Saint's Paradise. And when we went, it turns out that it was the cafeteria, a church attached to this church, the United House of Prayer for All People. And it turned out to be the mother church, the headquartered church of the entire United House of Prayer for All People. And we had only at that point heard of all these like quote unquote churches and mosques of the fringes that Doc had talked about. Like, oh, there was this intellectual Fawcett who, for his PhD dissertation in anthropology, like took seriously these groups of people and wrote this book, Black Gods of the Metropolis. And Doc eventually had given a talk called Gods of the Black Poor. And for me, the way I feel about this, and like, this is like, it comes across as so serious and political, but for me, it's very personal. And I think it's personal for all of us who worked on this, because there's no way to explain the feeling you get when, like, I said this the last time you were here, Sister, about like how the feeling I got at Mosque number 12, where like, for me, coming outside of the Black community, I'm a woman of Asian descent. I grew up in a totally white community in Massachusetts. Sometimes I think you have to be outside of the community to come into it and really appreciate what's there. And there's no other, how do you explain the deep emotion you feel when you walk into Mosque number 12 and feel like these are new human beings? These are people, despite the harshness, the hostility of American white supremacist society, who have not responded with bitterness, but have found a path to the tenderness, the strength, and moral courage that you would hope an ideal society would embody. How do you explain walking into the House of Prayer, where you see the beautiful art the way these people have put up these churches and protected it against the gentrification of Washington, D.C. You know, Shaw Station, it's right next to Shaw Station. It's probably some of the most expensive property in D.C. But they held on to that property and are like, we're not going anywhere. And these people have service every night. They're playing music every night. And I'm sure it disrupts those high rent like apartments. They're like, we're not going anywhere because we were here first. And we're going to worship every night, all night, how we want to for God. And how do you explain that music? The music that makes you simultaneously want to weep and then also shout and scream. Like, you know, and I'm, you know, and this is me coming from a very disciplined, like, high achieving household where I'm taught to, you know, do things the right way, achieve all this. And for us, we wanted to take not just these institutions seriously, but the kinds of human beings who, despite decades of violence and degradation in an extremely hostile society, have produced emblems of civilization and beauty and have been able to produce generations of new human beings. And we wanted to take it seriously to be able to explain it as like, if there's going to be a future for this country, it's not going to be from white civilization. There exists an alternative civilization, a new civilization. And it doesn't just come from, and like for us, we felt it was really important to say, after the defeat of Reconstruction, where emancipation happened, but people are not free. Black people are still not free. And in fact, everyone on this continent is not free. But they just don't recognize that they're not free yet. How can we, like for us, it was really a love letter to institutions to be like, these are not just religious institutions. You have to take God, these Black gods of the urban North seriously. That despite, these are gods of resistance, but they're also gods of what freedom should be, what justice should be, what truth and beauty should be. And you can see it in the evidence of not just their worldview, the theology, but also in the evidence of the kinds of human beings, the men and women who are produced, the children who are produced. I mean, that's something that Blaze talked about in his section, the testimony he wrote about the music of the United House of Prayer for All People. The thing that is in common in all these institutions is when, like, the children of these institutions are the most pure-hearted. They are protected, they are cherished, despite the hostility and the real problems in this city. Like, the children are given weapons of liberation and freedom, which are ideas. Ideas of self-love, ideas of love for humanity, ideas of dignity. And it's the kind of childhood that I wish I had. I wish I had ideas that allowed me to withstand the humiliation and inferiority I felt every day growing up. Because my parents didn't know how to prepare me. But these ideas of the Black gods give all children the armor and the weapons of freedom to not just survive, but to become freedom fighters every day, to become warriors of resistance every day. And they're not appreciated. These ideas are not taken seriously, appreciated. And we see ourselves as coming from trying to add on to Fawcett by picking up Du Bois's method of revolutionary sociology. You cannot understand people just from understanding their objective material conditions. You must understand people's strivings. You must understand people's consciousness. Because, like, Doc used to say this all the time, but show me the white version of Elijah Muhammad. Show me the white version of Michael Jackson. Show me the white version of Martin Luther King. There is no white version because it is a civilization that cannot produce those kinds of human beings. But man, despite the horrific defeat of Reconstruction, the 20th century of this country is the fervor, is like the increasing fervor and building of an alternative civilization. And this was like, I think for us, like, we wanted to take seriously from a theoretical standpoint, but also from our hearts and our testimonies of what we saw, that there are existing examples of what a people's democracy that actually respects and cherishes children to death. It's a life that treats children and their future as a life and death situation, that treats art and humanity as a divine and revolutionary act, that we wanted to really do justice to these institutions and say that, honestly, we feel like the Black freedom movement and Martin Luther King Jr., he may not come from these Black gods institutions, but what he was grasping for was not any different from what the most honorable Elijah Muhammad was putting forward. The belief that there must be a vanguard of people who take the truth and take goodness and take love seriously as a powerful force to transform whatever this is on this continent. And yeah, in some ways, I think the way I see this issue of avant-garde, I actually think I think it's both. It's not just about the future, it's a retelling of the 20th century. It's making sense of the 20th century as a century of Black resistance and revolutionary Black thought in all of its dimensions, religiously, these religious institutions. King, Doc, your oral history, or this interview with you. I feel like it's us saying, here in 2026, what is the time on the clock of the universe? And we're saying we're embroiled in a very existential, significant fight for the future of humanity, if there is to be humanity on this continent. And I think that's what we're trying to retell the 20th century. We're trying to say that, and we're trying to even, like, I didn't talk about, but maybe someone else will, about how moving it was to also just discover, like, someone like Father Divine. You just, like, highly disciplined, dedicated people to the belief that God came to America as a Black man. And if we take that seriously, the gorgeous buildings of even the Central Branch of the Free Library, I mean, these beautiful, beautiful buildings in the city, that they don't have to be for the rich. They can be for the poor, the most dispossessed. What happens when you orient a whole city around the dispossessed? It becomes a democratic city. It becomes a revolutionary city. It becomes a city where children are safe. And there's something really moving about that concept of before segregation was even federally abolished as law, you had someone like Father Divine so boldly saying, I don't follow this law because I only believe in one law, and that's the law of Christ. And he was integrating Black and white people under a Black God before even the federal law was saying that Black men and women could worship together.
And campaigning against lynching.
And he campaigned against lynching.
Yeah.
So just like, yeah, so that's kind of, we wanted to explain something that for us, especially not coming from the Black community, that we felt so emotionally about, these towering churches and mosques of the Black community. We wanted to explain why we think that these ideas are the key to creating new human beings, including non-white white people, non-white Asian people in this country. Like, that's what we wanted to take seriously and explain.
I think this journal is, first of all, I'm going to share with everyone in my mind. It's so magnificent in the sense that a lot of these Black people and organizations don't even know the impact of the work that they do and the existence of them maintaining it. And being in the Black community, we've been so indoctrinated against ourselves to where the self-hatred permeates our minds every day, that we don't see the beauty of what our leaders and teachers have done. And so it's almost necessary that you all had to do this because of the condition that we're in. Many of these people I don't even know about because it's not taught in our schools. Black history, I remember when I was in school, it was one page and the teacher was like, we're going to skip that. And so we don't know who we are. We don't know the people that saved us and that have dedicated their lives and are still out there. And so now, being in the Nation of Islam, I see from their perspective the difficulty it is to reach out to your people and try to save them from the mental darkness that is in our community, from the media, from how we were raised, from the educational system. And so the fact that you all have done this is so, I don't even have the words, like, and I know that God he's moving in this world, and the people are in a different frequency now more than ever. Even the fact that I think you said it earlier, that the people are looking at the Iranians like, I want to be like them, which is insane. You think about 2011, I was a child, and I was in the Nation of Islam, and my parents said, you have to stop wearing your hair covering because the Islamophobia is picking up. And so the faith had to be hidden, still practicing the principles, but you couldn't be prideful or even embrace what you believed in. And so now being 30 and coming to that point to where now people are seeing Islam for a religion of peace and also revolutionary in the sense that they're not standing for oppression and the killing of children. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said that Palestine is a test for humanity. And you can see that the fact that the youth were protesting in America, they didn't expect that. They said, oh, what's going on? Because they thought that they were indoctrinated. But no, that's the humanity, that's the nature of all human beings, but it gets corrupted as you get indoctrinated in the public school systems, the media and whatnot. But the children, as you said, they're like, when you say we're not going to stand for this, and there's something more wrong with humanity than just the president. They see that because they're closer to their nature. And so what, these Black organizations and what religion tries to do is nurture that nature in the human being, the divine nature of humanity. And so it's so necessary because I chose to get registered in the Nation of Islam on my own. I grew up in the nation. And probably around 10, we stopped going to the mosque. So that's like a 20-year gap. So what made me make that decision was that Minister Farrakhan was one to stand up against tyranny and oppression. That's what did it for me, and that he had enough love to face the backlash of what people were saying about him and the nation and all that these Black leaders go through in the public eye because the threat that they have of freeing the people's minds. And so I think just being here and being around people that are also on that same wavelength is just incredibly amazing to me. And I wish that I could bring anyone into this realm and in this circle and in the mosque so that they can see the divinity of themselves and gain that power. And I think we're all trying to figure out how to do that for humanity. And I just want to thank you all again for doing this.
Well, I was going to say with, it's amazing how essentially with the Black migration north that these institutions are created in facing an unjust, segregated society, segregated church. Both Father Divine's Peace Mission and also the United House of Prayer for All People emphasized this all people component under a Black God. And what does that mean? And seeing that essentially as welcoming all people under a Black God who upholds the divinity and love for all people under that principle. And what is it that creates individuals, in spite of facing such terrible conditions, can see love for humanity and not actually react with the same hatred for others? And this is something that actually Emily had mentioned when you guys were first exploring and going to these institutions, is that they're not just religious institutions in the sense of a God of spirituality, however religion is defined, but these are religious, political, and economic institutions, and therefore representative of actually something that is all-encompassing in society, all dimensions of society. How the way that Father Divine was able to have the Divine Lorraine Hotel, all these different places that required economic organization and reorganization, and political, and bringing together people and mobilizing people. And I think that was what you guys had also had worked out in these explorations, which is that narrative that these are just religious institutions. And rather, I think it is something that, sort of along with what King has said, is an ecumenical, ecumenical meaning across the different religions. What is that, the essence of these religions? And there's the Nation of Islam, there's the Peace Mission, there's the United House of Prayer for all people, but across all of these different quote unquote religious institutions, the essence of it was love for all people and love for humanity. And I think that was also the beautiful thing in free school coming in contact with these different institutions, is that I think, especially I had heard with Apostle Crawford with the United House of Prayer, it is a Black institution in the sense that most of its history, its current composition is largely Black. But he was saying actually back in the day, there were more, I think, others, not just non-Black people within as well. I think in some ways, seeing us, Apostle Crawford, become so elated in a way, because he's saying, yeah, like, the United House of Prayer is for all people, not just Black people. These values of love and humanity and freedom are for all people. And I think for many of us too, it reinforced why why King as well is so important, where King is talking about a world house and a unity of all people, a principled unity among people. And we saw that as organic, or we saw the evidence of that organic within the lives of Black folk, despite counter narratives that disunify people. There are still these seeds among the people that are trying to bridge different civilizations. But actually, on this thing of civilizations, this goes back to July 4th, just one note, when Jeremiah had asked Kamisha and Naima of like this concept of civilization. And I think you're going to have to remind me like the exact words that she said. But what I remember is like, wait, actually, it makes a lot of sense because white folk are not civilized and talk in the behaviors of war and violence. How can you bomb children? But yes, essentially, I think, a lot of free school has gone to many of these institutions, and it's just a difference. It is, I forget if it was Father Divine, but essentially this concept of heaven on earth. You go to these places, and it's very unusual for people to go to these places because you're so used to a hostile place, a hostile city like Philadelphia. But you go into, whether it's the Nation, whether it's the United House of Prayer. I haven't gone to Father Divine's Peace Mission yet. But people are so loving and open and generous. And it's so different. And I think that's what we mean when we say a society built upon a different civilization, a different set of values. What would Philadelphia look like if the whole of Philadelphia had those same values? Right. Would it still be the violent city that it is? Would it still be the poor city that it is? But it was very moving, especially in reading, like, despite having watched the process of it coming together, reading the Avant-Garde issue was very moving for me. And I think Yeah.
Mhm.
Obviously.
Well, just briefly I also really enjoyed reading the Black God's report, and I really like the section about the Father Divine and kind of how, like you're saying, you actually see concretized what that new form of governance would look like. So this is an idea that we also brought into the Reform Ministry report, but I really like that. I mean, if we continue our work with the Nation of Islam, that's what's so remarkable about these institutions. You literally see evidence of that new civilization, that alternate civilization being built. And that is of tremendous significance for many people, the majority of people in the life of this nation at this time. I wanted to introduce the Reform Ministry report briefly also, but I like what Emily, you had said about the Black Gods report being a love letter to these institutions that you grew a relationship with.
Yeah.
I think we felt very similar, which is why we all felt, just this tremendous sense of anxiety writing our report. So Brother Gregory Muhammad, he's a member of Mosque 12, and we've had a relationship, I think, with him as early as 2014, 2015. And it's to the credit of the free school that we've been able to just continue to build it and nurture it. So I think our report was a love letter to the Nation of Islam, but also a love letter to free school. And I want to say that because we really saw this report on our behalf as a dialogue between free school and NOI, essentially through the voices of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan and Martin Luther King Jr. And for us, we put tremendous attention and care into the way that we organize the report, because it's just, you can't just give information. You're telling a story, but you're also trying to make it inheritable for anyone who reads this. To say, like, I read this and I can identify with it. Like, this could be me, or I can gain something from this. And so the categories we focused on were very deliberate. We had like hours of quotes and just conversations from Brother Gregory, but we were very selective in how we edited it. And we really focused on this question of how does an organization like the Nation of Islam produce a human being of such high caliber, who, to Alice's point, must move to the front of rebuilding this new society. And we see evidence of that in his life. And that's the Kingian question, what we've been addressing for months at this point. What is the 21st century King strategy? In Brother Gregory's life, in his life as an expression of the Prison Reform Ministry, we have identified answers to that question of great political significance. So specifically, we framed his life and his work within the framework of nonviolence as a revolutionary strategy in the 21st century. And that gets to an idea that a couple of people have brought up today. But when evil has become as pervasive as it is in the world, and yet you have this counter response, the great potential for unity and rise in people's moral consciousness. I mean, I just think Gandhi and King's idea of the nonviolent army, the army of peace, a militant peace, is becoming very, very relevant. That something literally like the creation of a new civilization will be a requirement for undermining the way that white supremacy and war have reshaped the world. The last thing I wanted to say is it goes back to the way we began the conversation today. We were very deliberate about wanting to connect the Islam of Black America, as expressed through the Nation of Islam, with the Islam of West Asia and the Islamic people's heroic resistance against Zionism. That's something that, like, you already naturally spoke to and others have spoken to, but that's a bridge that we really believe in. And that's why we chose to end the report the way we did, to say the way that Islam becomes a world religion and a world force in the struggle against white supremacy, that is going to be a 21st century fulfillment of King's vision of the world house of the beloved community.
Yeah, I'd like to connect the war in Iran to the event we just did and the new issue of Avant-Garde to say that Iran has mounted an unprecedented challenge to white supremacy, which has given the peoples of the world an alternative and has further clarified the mandate for the American people. For the unprecedented challenge, when I think about like brave, heroic people's struggles in the world, let us take like the people of Vietnam to be able to challenge the United States. What a toll it took. These savages in power really meant it when they wanted to send Iran back into the Stone Age. They really did try to flatten Vietnam and burn it to the ground. They really meant that. And they have threatened the world with extinction when they dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan. So, mounting the challenge to white supremacy in the world really has taken, incalculable loss of human life. And for the people of Iran to be able to confront this challenge and not have to pay that price because they have assumed a level of strength, both in terms of, as a nation, a state, a people, and moral courage. I think that is unprecedented in the history of this country. And, to get to that, any point of strength and of a people, usually you have to make a deal with the devil, usually with the United States, whether you're the other Gulf Arab nations, where you have to cooperate with injustice and tolerate and even support Israel and host American military bases and aid in the destruction of other peoples. That has been the current model of development that they've offered. Or I guess, they dropped the nuclear bomb on Japan. You say, we're going to host our military is now your military. We run the shit now. That has been how the United States has operated. And Iran never made any of those compromises. And they paid a price for it, but they have stood stronger and more dignified than any other nation that I have seen in the history of this world in the face of these modern challenges of white supremacy. And this is an example to any country in the world now. If we can do it, then any other country can do it now. It's not overnight, and it's not. I'm not belittling or making it seem so easy. I still don't understand how Iran was able to do it, but they did it, and so that puts the question on any other country, and now the American people. What are we going to do about it? Because now we can do a lot. I have a little bit more, but we can go back. And the way that they were able to confront injustice in our country, they waged a struggle on behalf of the American people too. And I still feel responsible, even though they did more to take on this government than I feel I've been able to do, and more than I think the American people are still capable of doing. We're capable of more. That puts the question on our table for courage and moral leadership. And like the time in the Vietnam War, where one of the great mandates was we refused to cooperate and go to be combatants. That wasn't quite the question, because one, the world has changed, and that was a struggle that, let's say, Muhammad Ali or King and many other great leaders were able to mount. Now the greater challenge is like the whole remaking of the country as a whole, from the roots of its foundation of civilization. And that does require the direct participation of the people in the transformation of the country. And I took the overwhelming response in the event that we did to be a reflection of that deep desire that the American people still have for that. I don't think people are satisfied with just that the United States was defeated in Iran. I think it still falls upon us, and we still want to do that. And I believe that this issue of Avant-Garde is one of the strongest contributions of a scientific understanding of like what are we capable of doing in transforming ourselves in this country, and what can be done? You know, I'll speak a little bit more specifically to the report on the prison reform ministry. You know, through the life of Brother Gregory Muhammad, living out the highest ideals that the Nation of Islam and the prison reform ministry have put on the table for us, I think that shows the natural congruence and convergence with the ideas of King and the, I guess, you know, the concrete example of what we can do in facing white supremacy in one of the, I would say, worst conditions possible in the prisons of the United States. And I would hope that it would be a concrete example of what can be done to come closer to a great people that are still in struggle and have never ceased to be in struggle with white supremacy. Yeah, that's mine.
May I just go, you go. Okay. Yeah, just congratulations to everybody that worked so diligently on this issue. And, you know, I know a lot because of Michelle's vision, the interviews with Leo and Alfie, and now with Gregory Muhammad. These but these interviews are very important because they open up a new world that is Philadelphia to many young people, to many older people. You know, Gregory Muhammad is as much Philadelphia as the mayor, as any elected official.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe more so. And a dedicated life. Or, you know, with Leo Jackson, very, very significant that the ordinary man and woman is elevated. And I think, you know, I know in part it is Michelle's vision, you know, looking back to such people as Leo and Alfie, and looking at the history of music as part of the history of consciousness. And I don't think Philadelphia has ever had a journal like Avant-Garde that celebrates Philadelphia. The other thing, and you know, the Black God study, which is, excuse me, which is a study of the history of consciousness, really is. You know, in most circles, most theological, religious, academic circles, there's certain names you don't mention. You know, you don't mention the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You don't mention Daddy Grace. You don't mention Noble Drew Ali or Bishop Cherry. You know, these people are not mentioned because they are not, quote, respectable as Christians or as religious and prophetic voices. But I think it's to the credit of what you all have done here that you mention these names and you say that these are important thinkers, thinkers, and so on. So I like to, you know, just say that that's a great contribution. And I know you all are always talking about your generation and what your generation must know. And you're absolutely right. And the creation of new knowledge through doing sociology and sociology of consciousness. It's really a valuable thing. Now, of course, there's still people who, you know, because of their pettiness, wish to ignore his contribution to Philadelphia and to the struggle here in Philadelphia. But, you know, I don't take lightly that we name these great people. This means a lot, you know? Yeah, that's one, but, I think Gregory, I think the way y'all put this together is very, very important. And we all know Gregory. And, you know, we hang out with him at different events and all of this. And we all know his wife, Sister Catherine. And, you know, I can only imagine Gregory, how he's feeling, you know, because when you hear his story, you know, he fell. He fell from the standards of his family, you know, because he wanted the authentication of people who were somewhere else. But then he rose again. He rose in prison. And now he's rising even more. And I don't think that he ever thought in his wildest imagination that a group of young people would seek him out to learn, to tell his story and to learn from his story. And I know myself listening to the two-part interview that you all did, and I still think that's valuable, especially part 2, where he said he wanted to have the questions so he could write his responses and be more precise. And I think he is an example of a new human being arising out of the ruins of a collapsing society and civilization. And I don't, you know, it's so emotional. And when you put him together with our work, our developing work with children, you know, we're seeing the moral, because as we said, I think it's very true that children are the least tolerant of immorality and lying. Children. And I learned this from Blaze as young as 2 years old, maybe even earlier, that children are a moral force. And then you get a Gregory Muhammad himself, who fell but rose and is still rising. Or I just say my last thing, I think an underappreciated and underused interview is with Ishmael Muhammad. I don't think any side in this, including, forgive me for saying, the Nation of Islam has not appreciated that interview. Most of the people that I speak to that are members of the Nation of Islam have not even read it, you know. But this is very important, and I'll tell you why I think it is important. Because of who Ishmael is. He is a son of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And his mother Tanetta Muhammad, herself a huge figure. You know what I'm saying? And he, as he says, was raised under the tutelage of Minister Louis Farrakhan. So he has a special autobiography and a special philosophical outlook. His mother is not your run-of-the-mill thinker. She is, in fact, her thinking informs Minister Louis Farrakhan. He admits this. So when Ishmael, I'm just saying, you put all of this together, you begin to be able to see the great capacity of the people to make change you know? And I consider all of these, you know, great gods of the Black poor, all of these organizations constitute a real vanguard.
Right.
And my last point, if you don't mind. You see, the fact that we are able to say to young people whose default position when they become conscious is some form of left radicalism, which I don't find a problem with, but it is totally inadequate, totally for the American people. It doesn't fit. Nor does, as you put it, Nuri, the nihilistic point of view of my friend Gerald Horn, and I say that seriously, a friend who was broken in the political struggle, you know. But then you see, but my point, Gregory continued 30-some years in prison. His hopefulness, his generosity,
Yes.
his kindness, you know what I'm saying?
Your question, Michelle, about the connection of Islam in the West versus the East is so, especially with Iran. I learned recently, or the way that Minister Farrakhan said it, he said that the founding fathers stole a whole nation of people, Black people. And there were nations just stuck out to me. And he said they stripped us of our language, our religion, our dress, and broke apart our families because they did not want Islam in the West. If you think about the founding fathers had Qurans in their libraries, which means they knew of Islam and even used some of the language and the principles to create the Declaration of Independence. That doesn't come from the mind and the hearts of people that knew and had already enslaved a whole group of people. And that language is cognitive dissonance. So where did they get that from? They had the Quran. Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, so they knew the power of Islam. And you could not be a slave and be a Muslim. You can only have one master, which is God. And so we fast forward to 2026 with Iran and how everybody is somewhat seeing Iran as the champion against America. It's so interesting. And it's like you said earlier, you think that they're winning because of their ideology. What are they teaching their people that makes them 10 toes and not be traitors? They want the freedom of their people. And Minister Farrakhan, like you said, there was going to be someone to be invited to that funeral. The Honorable Minister Farrakhan definitely visited Iran multiple times in the Muslim world, and he was accepted. And America didn't want him to come back after he went to visit Iran because of that conflict. But he came back anyway. And in 1985, he said, when he had his More Than a Vision experience, that conference was that there was a war on the Muslim world. That's what he came back and said, and on the Nation of Islam and the youth. So we fast forward to see how this is being played out, and we're looking at all of these characters, chess pieces. We can kind of see where it's going. And then again on it was 2024, his Savior's Day speech, and he was talking about the war in Palestine being a test for humanity. And he told us, the followers, that we're connected to people that we may not see us connected to because we don't know yet our stories and how they will cross. But he said, what we see being done to them is coming here to America. Because if the people grasp onto Islam, that's a major threat to America in the way that they live and how they have the elitists versus the class of the enslaved, and even the Constitution saying that you're free until you commit a crime. our people don't know that the depths of where this foundation of this Constitution, and so this 250 years that's coming up that just passed, the writing is on a wall for America, and the people don't know it yet, but it's getting to a boiling point where we will want something that the Trojan horse to ride to freedom. What is that? And then people see Iran winning. What does that mean for America?
Yeah.
What will the people actually look to as the means or the modem of change? And so that question is so powerful in this discussion, and the pieces that you're picking apart is just opening my eyes to what, because we're all a part of it. The American people think we have nothing to do with the war. How is that going to affect us? We just think it's, the inflation of the gas and the money, but it's going to be a more difficult time for us to grasp the reality and the danger that we're in. And the last thing I would say is when he said what we're seeing over there in Palestine and in the East is coming here, he said, look up the book, The Palestinian Laboratory, which is Israeli technology on how to control uprisings and occupation. Because as America tries to grasp the control on the people, they're going to have tactics to control. And so that's what that book is about, on how to control the people in any opposition to their government and mistreatment and oppression. And we even see Palantir popping up, if anyone knows about that, the surveillance of the citizens and the people. And so we have to ask ourselves what comes next with that. But just being aware of it is so important.
Throughout the conversation, like about the issue and about the journal, I was thinking a lot about, I guess it's from the Bible, but then King quotes it, like man is meant for God, and we will be restless until we find him. And I was thinking about that because in some ways that is what describes like the Great Migration North and the founding of these like Black Gods institutions, which are that the people who moved from the South to the North were not satisfied with the religious experience of like the normal like Black churches. And they were seeking something new, like basically the Black gods of like love, beauty, and truth. And I feel like in some ways, like Emily, when you were describing the feeling that like you had or that we had when we went to the house of prayer or like seeing Father Divine, I think is almost a sense of like, oh, like we can belong actually to something in America, and we can belong to the people or these gods. Like this idea of being united under like a Black God and not being the only resolution in some ways to the American crisis or to the problem of like white civilization versus like civilization in general. And I was thinking about it too because, yeah, Doc, when you said that Brother Gregory is in some ways more of a representative of Philadelphia, and it reveals like the dignity and the possibility of the ordinary person in Philadelphia, who are not going to be profiled by like the New York Times or whatever journal. And that doesn't matter because there's something there. And I was thinking about it during the 250th too, because in some ways, like, I feel like the American people are searching for a sense of belonging or a sense of who they are. And it's Black people, but it's also white people. And it's also like non-Black, like immigrants, like all of us, or like me, who ask like, what is the point? Or like, where do I? And I feel like the answer is like basically through Black civilization. And Brother Gregory is like a representative of that civilization. And it's something concrete for us. And I feel like it's because it's both like urgently political in this moment, like talking about Palestine or Iran, like there are very real tasks for us. But I feel like it's also something higher, like the sense of like cosmic belonging or the sense of like wanting to feel complete, that I feel like is also an important part of the struggle. And so I think just in some ways, like we, like reading the issue, it's almost like we want to pledge allegiance to some, not like the flag, not like this country as it is, but you want to pledge allegiance to like this country that is not yet fully realized, but these people who are like living and who are struggling in this moment.
Yes.
And so I feel like in some ways, like this idea that like we're meant for God and we'll be restless until we find him, I feel like is also a description of the American people in this time. And I feel like in some ways, like the question is, who is that God? And who are we as a people? And what kind of God are we going to find? So yeah, I was just reflecting.
That's just, man was made for God and will not find peace until he finds it. So I think this thing, the only reason I just, the underlining of peace. That's what
Before,
we transition and stuff.
well, I just wanted, because we have Meghna and Nathan.
Before we transition and stuff. I just wanted to say quickly that Nuri, earlier in the discussion when we were talking about that part of people that is nihilistic or pessimistic and sees us going to hell, and so, well, what can we do about it? And saying that we do have a belief in the future. In my mind, as you were saying that, I was thinking not only a belief in the future, but a belief that we can build heaven or make heaven real, heaven on earth. And then you brought it as well, Alice. And that's something that we're learning from the Peace Mission, but I think is also exemplified from the House of Prayer or even King and his work. And I think that going through the study with the Black Gods group has deepened my capacity to understand even the funeral of Khomeini, to read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited, to have an understanding of a figure like Christ as a martyr for humanity, executed by an unjust government. That is a link that I can find with the struggle in Iran against white supremacy, that Black America has something to contribute to. And also just the last thing is, after doing the interview with Apostle Crawford, I remember.
Speak up just a little.
After doing the interview with Apostle Crawford, I remember coming out of the church with Jeremiah and Albert, and it's late at night, you have a bus to catch, but we were just talking about it quickly and we wanted to talk about it because it was so beautiful. And I remember telling, I don't know if you had left by that point, but when Albert and I were walking back home, I remember telling Albert that beyond just the beautiful ideas that Crawford was expressing in the interview, it was also his character, him as a man, his grace, his love for people, his generosity, which, as much as anything he had said, was moving to me. I remember saying to Albert, that's the kind of man I'd like to be. And that, I just want to give that as like the testimony to these institutions and their ideas is in the lives of the people.
Is it that you want to cover the other articles?
I guess that's just before I wanted to give a chance to like Meghna and Neha to talk, but
I think we can also potentially save it for next week if we want, like continue the discussion. But I wanted to make a quick comment in response. I appreciate how you reframe the interviews because it's something that we're doing more and more of, this sort of dialogue with these extraordinary, ordinary leaders in the Black community. Because I think with the first interview we ever did at Free School, I think it was in 2023 with the jazz producer, Bill Gadsden. And over a period of years, I think we really saw the effects of that interview and the Alfie interview, and that it reconstituted the Black music community in the city permanently. And I think we even saw that with the 250 at the 250 with their presence to an extent, or their support of it. And with the Leo interview, I think it was significant because by lifting up this man with whom so many people in the city identify, admired, respected, saw as a brother and a friend, we lifted up an entire section of the community. And it makes me think of Baldwin's mandate, where he says the role of the artist is the same as like the role of the revolutionary, which is the same as the role of the lover, like to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation to make freedom real. And it's part of why I feel pretty convicted about, you know, this one form of politics. So I just appreciate that you had framed it that way. Brother Gregory, to your point, he had written us after the report, and he said because he endured years of solitary confinement, which, like, you know, some of us were reading Why We Can't Wait to prepare for this 250 event, and King talks about his experience of being in solitary confinement for a day, you know, and he talks about how brutally existential those 24 hours were. And then Coretta, worried for the safety of her husband, calls the president and they get him out. Brother Gregory was in solitary confinement, sometimes willingly, for years, you know. We chose not to really write about it because I don't think we're really ready to understand that level of sacrifice yet. But he shared that with us. And he wrote to us after the report, like, I used to sit in my cell waiting for this day to come.
Waiting for this day to come.
And by this day, he means us, you know, the deliverance of this relationship. Yeah.
I did want to add something with respect to the prison reform report. I remember that after we had our first interview with Brother Gregory, I was very moved and very touched that he shared a lot of personal information with us, and he didn't have to, but he did, because I think that represented a kind of political trust that we had formed with him. And I remember that after that interview, that same evening, I went and I looked up what are the prison reform initiatives that exist currently. And there is, and I made a note, there's the Sentencing Project, which combats mass incarceration and extreme sentences. There's the Equal Justice Initiative that challenges abusive prison conditions, wrongful convictions. There's the Pennsylvania Prison Society, which monitors facilities and supports local families. There's the Root and Rebound, which provides legal advocacy to help formerly incarcerated individuals clear records and find housing or jobs. There's the Reform Alliance that works to transform supervision systems to prevent individuals from being sent back to prison for minor technical violations. And in all of this, I thought the Prison Reform Ministry of the NOI is so unique because it does not seek to reform the prison system, which it already knows is, you know, an arm of the white supremacist system. It chooses to reform the individual. It transforms the individual, gives them the knowledge of self that is required to, as you said, rise. I don't think any other initiative that currently exists and is funded and studied does this. What the Prison Reform Ministry of the NOI has been able to do is put the human being at the center of the question and say that it is only by you knowing yourself and what you are worth and the potential that exists within you is how you can non-violently fight this system and eventually become the vanguard that changes the system.
Right.
And I thought that was the rejected stone becomes the cornerstone. And that was also a part of our report. And I thought that clicked something for me where, you know, this is where King's vision connects with the NOI's vision as well. King also believed in this moral revolution of values, that the transformed nonconformist is eventually going to be the bearers of this nonviolent revolution. Even you look at the Indian freedom movement, the foundation of nonviolence was that you have to have the spiritual and moral power to change your enemy. That they feel a certain shame in treating you a certain way, and they have to self-reflect, and that's the only way to change them. Like it's like a transformed individual transforms another individual and so forth. And I feel like, as we were talking about that Gregory Muhammad, Brother Gregory, I don't know if he's listening, but he is a representative of this new kind of people, a new civilization. Yeah. And as we were saying, there exists in this nation, there's a nation within this nation, right? As in the church within the church. Yeah. And we have to seek to learn from it. I feel like this report, what Michelle, Jahan, and I have done is to try to excavate new knowledge to bring to the world and say that this is unstudied information and it needs to be seen in a new light and eventually
put it this way, in its proper light. I'm sorry.
And maybe that light is what guides us to the future.
Yeah.
I don't know if Meghna, if you wanted to share, also Jahan, if you wanted to say anything about President Islam, or Meghna talk about the immigration. If you wanted to share, also Jahan.
Yes, can you guys hear us?
Mm-hmm. Can you all hear us?
Oh, they're muted anyway.
Yes.
Sorry, it's a little we're a little disoriented with the audio, but we'll just talk. I just wanted to say briefly on the prison reform ministry also that, I'm just very grateful, I think it's for everybody, for Brother Gregory to share so much of these experiences, and honored that he would allow us to attempt to chronicle and study them. And I also just think that one of the lessons for me, and I think we tried to make this argument in that report as well, is that we do see the prison reform ministry, and especially the work of the Nation of Islam in its refounding under Minister Farrakhan, as basically a great example of nonviolent action post the assassination of Martin Luther King, especially the work in the prisons. And one thing that really comes through I think in the report is the moral uprightness with which Gregory faced these situations. Yeah. And there's several things that we tried to share where he acted in a very moral manner even with the racist prison authorities, and how that was like a very important teaching that he got from Minister Farrakhan, but that served him in his rising, as Doc said. And I totally agree that I think that a figure like a Brother Gregory embodies what the Black proletariat has looked like under this period of counter-revolution, despite all these oppressive conditions continuing to rise and rise. So I'm just very interested to see the response from members of the Nation of Islam, from those who are interested in this question of criminalization and incarceration, but also those who are interested in nonviolence and the continuing relevance of nonviolence after the 60s.
Yeah, I can just speak briefly, but I almost think we should have talked about mine first, because I want to end on the beautiful, positive. Everything everybody's been saying has been so moving, especially this thing of this really incredibly high moral standard to which we must aspire to be worthy of the world to come, embodied in the life of someone like Brother Gregory, and so many of our leaders who are, put down and erased, but that we have to lift up and follow ultimately. And just the article that I wrote I think it was kind of related to what Emily said. As Emily had mentioned, this issue is kind of a retelling of the 20th century, specifically this question of immigration. And debate about immigration on the news, on the one hand from Trump, who says immigrants are stealing our jobs or whatever, and they are part of the problem.
And then the left, which is saying we must defend immigrants and open borders, and people like Zoran Mamdani who say that New York was built by immigrants. But neither side really gets at the crisis and the moral crisis and the human crisis that we're facing. And in fact, the title of the article is Towards a Moral Stance on Immigration. But the moral stance is that the immigrants themselves must take a stand, because the history of immigration has been one in which immigrants consent to what King called the triple evils of society: racism, militarism, and materialism. I won't get into the details because I know we're getting towards the end, but just the idea that we all have to hold ourselves to a very high moral choice and be willing to speak uncomfortable truths. But also there is a path forward for to becoming a part of the new American people and everything that people have talked about today. So
I think actually this article, immigration, is related to what we were discussing about July 4th, because we don't believe that America is a white nation in the way some of the conservatives believe, but we also don't believe that it is a quote unquote immigrant nation in the way that the liberals are saying. We believe in this, and I think that's the argument this article makes. We believe in this concept of the rejected stone of Black America and struggle becoming this foundation stone for a new people. And that if the immigrants can get that question right, then actually they can serve as this bridge for this remaking of the world, for this civilizational unity. But we have to get that ideological point right. And I mean, I think all of these articles are contributing to this, helping the people get this ideological point right.
Yeah, and just one thing that I did think about is that, and I tried to talk a little bit about in my article is, I mean, we talk about the Nation of Islam, but I think it is really beautiful that someone from the East, Master Fard Muhammad, played an important role. And is he someone that we too can aspire to in understanding the world, and who will be leading people towards the future and into a new world? And it was a very difficult article to write for obvious reasons, because I think immigrants are very celebrated, and in a society where the people who should be celebrated are not. So, but we must all strive to be something more and something better. So, I'll leave it at that.
Can I add a comment? Wow, first of all, just wow. Master Muhammad, he was from the East, and he came to teach the Honorable Elijah Muhammad Islam as a means of freedom for Black people. But he didn't put himself out front for Black people to look at as the model, because Elijah Poole, he was a sharecropper. He had the experience of Black people. And so he said that the best lesson he wants Elijah to teach his people is to accept your own and be yourself. All the original people had the nature of righteousness. So the book is a guiding rule book, a principle for people to follow, but the nature of man is righteous and good, but it's been corrupted. And so it is the human family and having that knowledge, and that's the definition that he gave the supreme wisdom. What is the duty of a civilized person? To teach the knowledge and wisdom, understanding of the human family, because we're interconnected. There's no disunity is of Satan and of the devil, and that's what creates wars and having someone on the bottom and the 85% versus the 10% elite. So that you bringing up his name and his role, and that just struck a chord.
Yeah, I feel like I'm realizing a lot of the depth of the issue itself through the discussion. And I agree, there will probably need to be a follow-up conversation, because there's actually a lot more topics that we cover in the issue itself. Both within even the articles we talked about and some of the ones that we didn't get to talk, like document review, I think, is worth revisiting, plus the Jonathan, you wrote an article on Epstein, which I think is really important. Neha, who's already talked about it, wrote an essay on the Iran war and making the argument for why we should see it as a civilization war, as the most helpful explanatory category above many other categories that people use to try to explain this war. So yeah, we can continue on that, but I'm really happy that everyone felt so motivated to talk. Before we end, we are selling the issue for $10 in person, and for the first time, we'd like to mail it out to people who'd like to purchase the issue. And so, if you're interested in being mailed a copy of the issue, you can email the Free School Gmail, which we can send in the comments. But especially for people who have listened to us for a long time and who we feel like we know, even if we've never met you in person, as well as people that we do know. Yeah, we would love to be able to share the issue with more people. So yeah, just reach out to us, especially if you'd like to. Yeah.
I know a lot of people will read it online.
Yes.
Could we ask that those who enjoy it maybe could also send a donation to the Free School to continue the work of Avant-Garde?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I will say, just because we forget to say it sometimes, all of the content in all of our issues, this one and the previous issues, is available for free online.
Right.
So please support the print copy if you can and purchase, but everything is available on our website. It's avantjournal.com, and then you can find it from the Free School website too.
Oh yeah.
So maybe next Free School we can talk about the remaining articles.
Yes. Definitely.
I was really struck. There's a lot actually in the interview that we did with you, Doc, that I'm still making sense of. Yeah, I think it's really significant.
Well, I guess I'll say something briefly about Doc's interview that's relevant to today's conversation, and actually goes back to something, Emily, you had said. So back in October, when we celebrated Doc, your birthday, we had done this series of interviews with you. Obviously, there's a lot to learn from your experiences, but I think specifically for this issue, we were trying to trace your search for the revolutionary soil of this country.
Yeah.
Meaning, upon what strategy can we fight in this nation? And so for this article or interview with you, or what we had synthesized for this article of your interview is that search, your search through various trends or paths in your life, from revolutionary nationalism to the Communist Party in Winston, and then eventually to King. What is it that drew you to each of those movements, but then also what was insufficient or not answered that leads ultimately to you rediscovering Du Bois and King? And I think in some ways that history of yours, that experience of yours, also shapes how we in the Free School are able to see Black Philadelphia, the Black freedom struggle, and then all of these different figures that we're talking about in the issue of Avant-Garde. Because it is that lens that we're able to see Brother Gregory Muhammad, the United House of Prayer of all people. So, yeah.
Yeah, the Doc interview can also be viewed as a study of the history of consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I know that we're kind of over time, but we had kind of a lot more comments, which I will try to be succinct in reading. Lorenzo Betancourt says, "We must support Iran. The struggle of a people against imperialism is our struggle. The culture or ideology of the fight against imperialism is today the front line of the class struggle." Mr. Ed says, "The same ancient forces that tried to enslave humanity through the Axis powers are making their final stand through the Western war machine. They are getting weaker and clumsier every day. And M. Spark says, civilization? What civilization? Mandela asks, how can you fix a system that was broken from the start? The system needs a complete 180-degree change. Communism might be the last hope of the USA surviving. And then Mr. Ed said, imagine negotiating with Trump's people who murdered your leader, grandparents, thousands of children's relatives and friends. No apologies, no remorse, and shouting, get on your knees. What the heck? The new economic structure will be based on the best of capitalism and the best of socialism. That's a quote from Benjamin Crane. And then Mr. Ed also put in the Eugene V. Debs quote of, the issue is socialism versus capitalism. I'm for socialism because I'm for humanity. Bombalai said, I like the Chinese idea of supervising capitalism for the sake of socialism. And again, puts in the quote, no man is an island. Someone whose username is Shanti Om Hari Om says, right, Bombalai, we are all connected, as are all atoms in creation. An evolution of consciousness is taking place. Let's see. We gotta get up now says, injustice to one is injustice to all. Western imperialist leaders will be the last to get it. We have a lot of new commenters actually. So Dominus, someone named Dominus, is saying that in the Puranas it was predicted that towards the end, humanity would be driven to acts of madness. But how do you explain to people that their leaders and teachers are insane? Then said, after the imperialists killed King and JFK, the US started going downhill very fast. Someone whose username is George Washington VIII says, the vanguard is in Iran, China, Russia, Venezuela, the nations that are for the people, for peace, for the rule of all. Challenges and crisis are a part of curriculum for us all. Earth is a big school. There's a plan that can't be deleted. Global cooperation and world peace and the end of poverty are inevitable. But won't come. Then Shanti Om Hari Om also puts in a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, saying that the purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have made some difference, that you have lived and lived well. M. Sparks really liked what Emily said. Then a new commentator named, I think, Captain Kaga says, the old white male-dominated Western world is falling apart because it must. Humanity's future is brighter than most can imagine. Global cooperation and world peace are coming and cannot be stopped. Mambalai says, yes, it's true, righteousness is innate. Then, let's see.
Sister Tuara.
Yes, Mambalai was resonating and said, interesting to what Sister Tuara was saying. How Israel has an actual playbook on how to address the conflict. Right. And says, our only hope is a high moral standard and one love. And then Mambalai said 100 emojis.
Oh, well, we can end this session of Free School, but we're looking forward to revisiting the issue, especially the remaining articles next week. And thank you to our in-person and online listeners. So with that, we'll end our lecture.